our election is especially troubling. The Justice and Homeland Security Department have diverted thousands of law enforcement agents away from combating drug trafficking, terrorism, violent crimes against children, cyber crimes, and gun violence to participate in a mass deportation campaign. And now the Trump administration is fighting to deny birthright citizenship to children born in the United States to non-citizens, despite the clear language of the 14th Amendment. I would ask Donald Trump why he thinks he can pursue what is a clear violation of our Constitution. But as we learned in a recent TV interview, the President of the United States, quote, does not know, unquote, if he needs to uphold the Constitution. I kind of think he does. In addition to the administration openly violating and denouncing the rule of law, President Trump and his allies have also persisted in lodging unprecedented and unacceptable attacks on the federal judiciary. In one particular egregious example, on Memorial Day, the president referred to members on the bench as, quote, USA-hating judges and, quote, monsters who want our country to go to hell, the president's exact words. This kind of inflammatory language is part of the president's effort to delegitimize the courts because the orders that they've issued that he does not agree with, or to intimidate the federal judiciary more broadly. It should be condemned by all political leaders, regardless of party. The lawlessness of this administration is having damaging effects on the rights, liberties, and pocketbooks of everybody. And in this disturbing environment, many Americans have no greater ally than their state's attorneys general, who are engaged in multi-pronged efforts to protect the Constitution, the public interest, and hold the federal government to account. They are protecting the 14th Amendment's guarantee of birthright citizenship, challenging unlawful detention procedures, and fighting the administration's refusal to disperse funds appropriated by Congress. I'm sure they didn't anticipate what we faced. More executive orders issued by this president than any president in modern memory. Flooding the zone is what they call it. We have to respond. They are also stepping up to protect LGBTQ plus rights, voting rights, public education, fighting to push back against the terrorizing of our immigrant neighbors and Trump's transparent efforts to orchestrate a military takeover of the cities. I appreciate the work that the state's attorneys generals have done to defend our constituents. I want to continue that partnership today. Thanks for coming to speak on the issue. I'm going to recognize House Judiciary Ranking Member Raskin, and then we will introduce our witnesses. Congressman Raskin.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin, and thank you for your exemplary leadership here in the Senate for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the rights of the people. And I want to thank all of our attorneys general for traveling to Washington today and taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us, and all of our guests. About 250 years ago, America declared its independence from the absolute despotism of King George and the British Empire. In the monarchical societies, Tom Paine said, "The king is the law, but in the free societies, the law will be king." In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson said all men, and we can add women, were created equal, and stated that our social contract would rest on the consent of the governed and to serve the unalienable rights of the people. A decade later, the Constitution set forth a clear mission statement in the preamble, defining the purposes of the government not around the whims and the ambitions of one man, but rather around the collective purposes of one nation. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and preserve to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty, do hereby ordain and establish the Constitution of these United States of America. And then the very next sentence opened Article 1 by vesting all legislative powers in the Congress of the United States. The first article gives us the power to pass budgets and taxes, to govern commerce among the states and with foreign nations, to declare war, to regulate naturalization and immigration, to promote the progress of science, and many other purposes. And then in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, and all other powers necessary and proper for the execution of the foregoing powers. Article 2 on the executive branch, by contrast, is a slim several paragraphs. The most striking part is Section 4, which states that the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Sometimes our colleagues will say, we have three co-equal branches. Really? First of all, co-equal is not even a word, okay? Secondly, if we're co-equal, why is it that Congress has the power to impeach, try, and convict a president and remove a president, but the president doesn't have the power to impeach, try, convict, and remove us? The framers, the founders, were most seriously afraid of a president who would act like a mad king, drunk on power, avaricious and determined to take all other powers unto himself. Madison, in the Federalist Papers, defined tyranny as the collapse of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, into one power. That was the very definition of it. Well, Section 2 names the president commander-in-chief, not of the country, not of the government, but of the Army and Navy and the militias in times of actual service. So what is the core job of the president? The core job of the president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. In other words, take the laws that have been passed by the House, by the Senate, signed into law by the president, and execute them, implement them. The president gets his powers only from two places, the Constitution says, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly reaffirmed. The president gets his power either directly from the Constitution or directly from a grant of Congress. And that's it. That's the whole meaning of the Supreme Court's decision in the Steele seizure case in 1952. There are no other powers that the president gets just by virtue of being the commander-in-chief or being the president. Well, Article 3 vests all judicial power in the Supreme Court and inferior courts to clarify legal rights and responsibilities in actual cases and controversies. As the court put it in 1803 in Marbury versus Madison, it's emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. No, Vice President Vance, it's not up to the president to define what the limits are on the power of the president. That's up to the Supreme Court. That's the whole meaning of judicial review in Marbury versus Madison. As Senator Durbin says, we must defend the independence and the integrity and the security of the judicial branch of government. And when 4 federal judges, 2 of them appointed by Democrats, 2 of them appointed by Republicans, struck down Donald Trump's executive order purporting to nullify birthright citizenship under the Constitution, a number of our colleagues in the House began to call for the impeachment of these judges without explaining what they had done wrong, without explaining any fallacy in their analysis, just calling for their impeachment. There have only been 15 federal judges impeached in all of American history by the Congress of the United States. And it's always for corruption or bribery or income tax evasion. It's for actually engaging in a crime, a high crime or misdemeanor, not because the Congress disagrees with their analysis, much less because Congress disagrees with their correct analysis of a legal problem. It's never happened before. The Bill of Rights was added to protect the rights and freedoms of the people against abuse by the government, whether it's a Congress passing laws that infringe on liberty, or a president making up laws, usurping congressional powers, or violating constitutional rights, or indeed states trespassing the rights of the people. Now, here's the amazing thing. The framers understood, like Lord Acton, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so they arranged a constitutional system where power would be vertically divided, shared, and distributed between the federal government and the states and localities, as well as horizontally distributed among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. And the branches would check one another's abusive ambitions, and the people would exercise their freedoms of speech, press, assembly, petition of government, and so on to counterbalance the tyrannical propensities of government generally. We're in a dramatic constitutional confrontation today where every facet of the framers' design has been activated to try and save constitutional democracy and freedom. From the day he took office, Trump has tried to exercise powers like a king, trampling the rights of the people, usurping the powers of Congress, denouncing judges and threatening to defy the rulings of courts, and violating the legitimate authority of states and their elected officials. Last Saturday, June 14th, which was Flag Day and the president's birthday, he chose to stage a $45 million military parade in the streets of Washington. In response, at least 7 million anti-monarchical Americans assembled in over 2,000 protests in cities and towns across America for the unveiling of No King's Day, a magnificent demonstration of the inextinguishable resiliency of popular constitutional democracy in the face of dictatorial designs against the people. But the people marching in the streets from Philadelphia to Los Angeles, from the boundary waters of Minnesota to New Orleans, are not alone in this process. They reflect a powerful constitutional opposition in motion. Political leaders at the state level are fighting back in court along with their allies in Congress, and we are winning this fight every day in courtrooms across America. More than 328 lawsuits have been filed since Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Elon Musk took office, and federal courts across the land have remarkably issued 197 preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. The witnesses before us today, the attorney generals for the people of Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, and Illinois, are leaders in the fight for the Constitution and federal laws that have been abandoned by the president. And these chief state lawyers are winning significant battles in front of judges appointed by both Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. They are even winning in courts where judges preside who were appointed by President Trump himself. State attorneys general have brought at least 30 lawsuits against the new administration, successfully blocking many of its most reckless and lawless actions. They challenged Trump's efforts to nullify birthright citizenship and won injunctions to stop the order. They challenged Trump's funding freeze and won a court order forcing Trump to lift the freeze and deliver the funds to state and local programs. And when Trump didn't pay up, they went back to court to make him comply. They challenged DOJ's unconstitutional gathering of private data on millions of Americans, and just a few weeks ago won a ruling that will allow the suit to move forward. They sued when the administration tried to claw back billions of dollars in public health money and won an injunction against the rescission so that these funds would be delivered to the people of the states and localities. They sued to stop Trump's policies to dismantle voting rights and won a temporary injunction against major portions of his order requiring every citizen in America to prove their citizenship every time they go to vote. Trump's push against the rights of the people is losing in court, with judges striking down unconstitutional orders and issuing scathing rebukes to his lawlessness. Judge John Kuhnauer said of the Trump's birthright citizenship order, "I've been on the bench for over 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented was as clear as this." He went on to ask, where were the lawyers when the decision was made to sign this executive order, and said that it boggled his mind that any member of the bar would contend the order was constitutional. This is a judge who was appointed by Ronald Reagan to the bench. Congressional Democrats have joined the state attorney generals in this fight. Although we're limited in what we can bring ourselves by virtue of very restrictive legal standing doctrines against members of Congress suing the president, we have filed detailed amicus briefs in support of the state attorney general's suits, identifying our unique interests and unyielding determination to defend federal laws we have passed against executive usurpation. Of course, we have won some and we've lost some, and we would expect nothing less under the rule of law. But we will defend the rule of law. We will not be intimidated by Trump's threats and authoritarian tactics. Those of us who aspire to and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people, and the people are sovereign, and we all serve in the interest of the people. To every state AG who is with us today, and to those who are not here but are in this battle also for the rule of law, I say on behalf of all of our colleagues, it's an honor to be in this fight with you. Congressional Democrats are proud to stand with you in this fight to protect our Constitution, its values, and the rights of our people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Raskin. We're going to introduce the 4 witnesses and then proceed to take their testimony. I thank them all for attending. It's my honor to introduce my Attorney General, Kwame Raoul. Kwame Raoul, of course, has a background working as a prosecutor and several other important assignments as attorney of record, and then came the year 2004. And the state senator in his area was elected to be the United States Senator. His name was Obama. and the vacancy was created, and a hard-fought primary election ensued. Kwame emerged as the winner and the state senator from Obama's previous district in the Hyde Park section of Chicago. He worked on so many issues that are listed in the program here. I can't do them justice in just a few minutes, but he has been one of the leaders with the others who've joined us today in asserting the rights of the American people to stop the success that we are seeing in the demonstration of this new administration. I thank you for being here. Introducing the next Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, is Ed Markey of Massachusetts.
Thank you, and thank you, Dick Durbin. Thank you, Jamie Raskin. Thank you to my House colleagues. Thank you for your great leadership on these issues. And it's great to see my old pal Keith Ellison out there. It's my great honor to introduce Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell today. Attorney General Campbell is a titan of the legal profession, a tenacious champion, and a devoted public servant. And in this very critical moment in our nation's history, she has been leading the charge in the courts against Donald Trump, standing up to this administration and standing up for the rule of law. Attorney General Campbell and her top-notch staff have been diligently litigating cases to vindicate the rights of Massachusetts and our nation. She is fighting to protect the National Institutes of Health funding for medical research, to defend birthright citizenship, to support Harvard University against retaliatory attacks, to protect scientific research and education programs, and she's doing so much more with her great legal team. Attorney General Campbell has dedicated her life to serving the public. She began her legal career defending the rights of children and their families. After a stint as an employment attorney, she served as general counsel at the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, and she defended the Commonwealth on issues like healthcare access, affordable housing, and she continued her work in service of the public good by serving as legal counsel to Governor Deval Patrick. In 2015, she won a seat on the Boston City Council, and in 2018, she became the first Black woman to be elected City Council president in the history of the city of Boston. Attorney General Campbell is absolutely on the cutting edge of leading us. We're very lucky to have her from Massachusetts. Our nation is very fortunate to have you leading our legal fights at this time. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Senator Markey. We're going to turn this over to Congressman Raskin for the next two introductions.
Thank you very much. It's my honor to introduce first the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, who has served faithfully and effectively in that role since 2019. He's in his second term. Prior to that, I had the honor of serving with him in the U.S. House of Representatives. He served 6 terms in the House, 12 years representing Minnesota's 5th congressional district, and had a very productive and effective time there as well. And prior to that, served in the Minnesota State House and was a civil rights attorney. And I just say, Mr. Chairman, I've been in politics long enough to recognize 2 kinds of politicians. I've seen power politicians and I've seen justice politicians. And to me, Keith Ellison is a justice politician through and through, and he's perfectly situated as the Attorney General of Minnesota. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce my new friend, Attorney General Matthew Platkin of New Jersey. He served as AG for the people of New Jersey since 2022. Before that, he was the chief counsel to Governor Murphy, and also had an extensive and successful career in private legal practice as a partner at Lowenstein Sandler in the white-collar criminal defense and business litigation practice groups. And I also want to recognize, I think there are a few other attorneys general who are stopping in today, and the Attorney General for the District of Columbia, Brian Schwab, is here with us, and I want to thank him for joining us for this session as well.
Thank you. Before we turn to our witnesses, let me briefly lay out the mechanics of the meeting. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide an opening statement. There'll be a round of questions, and each senator and member of Congress will have 5 minutes to ask. So please try to remain close to that schedule if you can. Attorney General Raoul, you may proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee. Special thanks to my home state Congressman Garcia, who allowed me to share an airplane with him this morning. I'm honored to testify in front of you with my fellow state AG colleagues. the four of us, and I recognize A.G. Schwab, who is here, along with 18 other colleagues, have been engaged in the legal battles of our lives over the last 5 months. In anticipation of this crisis our nation faces, we began our preparation for this over a year ago. Today, I want to speak clearly and factually about 3 specific areas where the Trump administration's actions have had a deeply harmful impact: tariffs, education funding, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. At the outset, let me say that my office very commonly across different presidential administrations, including the first Trump administration, has worked in partnership with federal agencies on criminal matters, consumer protection matters, environmental matters, and I will continue to seek opportunities to do whatever is possible. Under the Constitution and under federal law, the president has enormous power. But in our democracy, there are limits on that power. And we have challenged instances where the administration has clearly crossed the line. Whether or not I disagree with President Trump on his policy agenda, he must act in a lawful way that is consistent with the Constitution and the laws that Congress has enacted. Unfortunately, the president and his administration have chosen, with many of their actions, to ignore the Constitution and federal law. And when constitutional guarantees are ignored, all Americans are at risk. One example of executive overreach impacting nearly every American is the Trump administration's executive orders imposing higher tariffs on most products worldwide. Only Congress has the authority to lay and collect taxes. The administration has attempted to invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA. However, the law applies only when an emergency presents an unusual and extraordinary threat from abroad. This is indeed the first time in American history that a president has imposed tariffs based on IEPA, and for good reason. It does not give the president the power to impose these tariffs. 2 courts have so far examined the merits of these claims, and both have agreed that the imposition of these tariffs is an unlawful use of presidential power. International trade is essential to states' economies. The administration's tariffs hurt small businesses that rely on international imports and will make it more difficult for our residents to purchase the basic goods they need at affordable prices. The administration is also working to attack another critical building block of this country: the education of our children. The total workforce of the Department of Education has been cut in half since January 20. And Secretary McMahon has called layoffs the first step on the road to a total shutdown of the department. Even though both the Department of Education itself and many of its divisions and responsibilities were created and are required to exist under federal law. The administration proposed billions in budget cuts to the department, including slashing funding for after-school programs, teacher training, and student loan forgiveness. It has terminated more than $1 billion in funding for K through 12 schools to respond to the impacts of the COVID pandemic. We continue to fight to preserve funding for all of these essential programs that serve our school children and educators. The administration's attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion has not been limited to our schools. The president's sweeping executive orders and actions attempting to roll back progress on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility knows no bounds. The administration has targeted private sector employers, law firms, university employers. It has eliminated diversity, equity, inclusion programs within the federal government and erased historical resources explaining our country's shared history. We know that the president's claims about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are simply untrue, factually and legally. Nonetheless, they are harmful. I'm proud to say that my state AG colleagues and I have been tirelessly fighting back against the Trump administration's constitutional and unlawful actions. We are unafraid to defend the rule of law with litigation, legal support, and public communications that are informed, urgent, and unwavering. And we have done so on behalf of all Americans and American institutions. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, General Raoul. General Campbell.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the members of the Joint Committee for allowing me the opportunity to testify today, including ranking members from both the House and the Senate. Thank you to my senator for the kind introduction and kind words. And of course, thank you to Representative Raskin, Senator Durbin, for your leadership now and of course in previous years and going forward. I am grateful. I am also honored to be here alongside my fellow state Democratic AGs, and sadly, it is only Democratic AGs that are standing up in this moment in time. It's an honor and privilege to work with them. Those who are in attendance today and those, of course, who couldn't attend, we all work together as partners in true collaboration, leaving our egos at the door, and most importantly, rolling up our sleeves to do the work. As the president continues to take reckless and unlawful actions that violate our Constitution and harm our residents, my colleagues and I have been fearlessly stepping up to hold the administration accountable and to protect our residents, our states, and our economies. As state AGs, we serve as chief law enforcement officers for our states, acting as the first line of defense against actions that violate our laws and harm our communities. We take these responsibilities seriously, and we hold not only a president, but frankly anyone accountable who violates our laws and infringes on the rights of our residents. So as President Trump continues to repeatedly disregard the Constitution, break federal law, and flagrantly abuse his power, it is AGs who are holding him to account on behalf of our states and the American people. Indeed, we've been exercising courage to defend the Constitution against the president's assaults and to uphold the rule of law, which this president arrogantly believes he is above. We continue to deliver significant wins, not just for our respective states and our residents, but for our democracy and the rule of law itself. Since the president took office in January, my colleagues and I, state AGs, have filed dozens of legal actions to uphold the rule of law and defend our states. And we're more than espousing the principles of upholding the rule of law. We're putting it into practice every single day, or maybe even developing targets on our backs. When the president tried to illegally cut billions of dollars in funding for life-saving public health research to cure illnesses like childhood cancer and Alzheimer's, we took action immediately and successfully to block those cuts and restore critical funding to our institutions. And when the president tried to illegally cut billions of dollars in funding for vital state services, such as child care, public safety, and transportation, we successfully blocked those cuts too. In each of these cases, the president has attempted to circumvent Congress's power of the purse, as defined in the Constitution, in favor of playing politics with our state services and public health. And that's exactly what state AGs have stopped. And we've secured countless victories for our residents through numerous court orders and injunctions against this administration's illegal actions, protecting our libraries, securing residents' personal data, preserving the integrity of our elections, and so much more. Because our legal systems and our courts, we know, are still working, we will keep at it. Just last week, one of our great judges in Massachusetts, this one happens to have been appointed by President Ronald Reagan, ruled in our favor to restore critical NIH funding with a powerful rebuke against what the judge deemed to be appalling and discriminatory actions of this administration. He didn't mince his words. While President Trump may believe he is accountable to no one, not even the American people, AGs are showing up every day to make it crystal clear that he is sorely mistaken. No one is and should be above the law. In the face of executive orders intended to stoke fear and division, we've also issued guidance affirming the existing rights of our residents, rights that have not and cannot be eliminated by the stroke of a Sharpie, and that remain protected under our state laws. This guidance being equally and just as important as our litigation efforts. Things like the ability to implement initiatives that foster DEI, for our doctors to provide life-saving, gender-affirming care, for folks to understand the role of ICE and the difference between our state authority and federal authority when it comes to immigration, and so much more. And not just that, while the federal government has stepped out of certain areas, we've stepped in to fill those voids. We have enhanced our work on consumer protection. We've enhanced and expanded our work on civil rights, on the environment. If anything, we are doing all of this, all while the president seeks to weaken, weaponize, or eliminate altogether various agencies, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, DOJ Civil Rights Division, and more. So as state AGs, we've been punching above our weight and playing a vital role in this moment. I often say Massachusetts is small, but I feel like Muhammad Ali in this moment, and I'm going to keep on fighting. And we are fighting for our democracy, our Constitution, a system of checks and balances, the rule of law, and our children and the next generation to come. We serve as frontline defenders of those crucial American institutions, not just for the present moment, but for the generations to come. And we'll continue to fight to uphold the law and protect our residents and recognize the real harm this is causing on folks while we do it. The laid-off federal worker, the sick child now without a potentially life-saving clinical trial, the single mother struggling to afford childcare, and so much more. It's an honor and privilege to be here. I serve as the first Black woman Attorney General of Massachusetts, the first woman of color to win statewide office there, and I don't take that honor lightly. It's an honor and privilege to serve. Look forward to answering your questions today. Thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, General Campbell. I might add, just as a footnote, that this is the committee, when we chaired it under President Biden, that was responsible for the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first African-American woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. So we share that celebration with your arrival here today.
Thank you.
Attorney General Ellison, you're no stranger to Capitol Hill. Take it away.
That's right. Thank you, Senator. Thank you to the entire committee, and thank you, Senator Durbin and Representative Raskin and all of you. First of all, I must thank you for inviting us, state AGs, to the most important capital in the world when it comes to the length and the breadth and the strength of American democracy. The United States is the oldest democracy under the same Constitution on the planet. So for you to platform us to talk about the work that we're doing now is incredibly important, and we're all very grateful because of it. We're faced with a question of whether this oldest democracy in the world is durable enough to withstand an overreaching executive. And I think the answer is it's durable enough if we're durable enough. I have to start my comments by saying that my friend, Speaker Melissa Hortman, would have been proud to know that this hearing is going on today. She was a woman of great principle and character. I met her when she was a legal aid lawyer in Minnesota in 1997. She represented a woman who was abused and mistreated by her landlord, and she brought a lawsuit against that landlord and won the highest verdict of that time, about $490,000 on behalf of this indigent woman who was absurdly mistreated by her landlord. Melissa followed her strong moral compass to the state legislature, where she and I served together before I went to Congress. And she built a career that was the envy of really anyone who watched her go. She was targeted because she tried to feed the hungry. Universal School Meals is a bill that she led and passed in the state of Minnesota. She was targeted because she tried to clothe the naked in the form of our state child tax credit, where she made sure that all families had the sustenance that they needed and reduced child poverty in the state of Minnesota. And she welcomed the stranger. Yes, through her work, we passed, in Minnesota, you get a driver's license if you can prove that you can drive a car. She's the best of us, and her spirit is in the room with us today. Many of the things that Donald Trump has been trying to do by executive order could be done. But one would need to introduce a bill to abolish the Department of Education. You need to introduce a bill to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You would need to change the Constitution through the legitimate process that exists to get rid of birthright citizenship enshrined in the 14th Amendment. What you can't do as president is issue an executive order like a edict or a proclamation to just change American laws. And so state AGs, along with many others, have stood up to defend the system of law. In February, state attorney generals sued the administration over illegal executive order that would end federal funding to medical institutions that provide gender-affirming care and potentially criminalize the provision of it. The order violates separation of powers, your powers, the Equal Protections Clause of the Fifth Amendment, the 10th Amendment, and the court later imposed a preliminary injunction that blocks the order in the plaintiff states. In April, we sued the Trump administration over their threats to cut federal funding to Minnesota schools if we did not comply with 2 executive orders purporting to ban transgender children from playing sports in schools, broadly deny the civil rights of transgender people. We sued for 2 reasons. One, they were wrong on the law. The orders and threats violate the separation of powers, the 10th Amendment, and Title IX itself. And we sued because this is bullying, plain and simple. Sometimes countries face a moment like this, a moment when a leader bent on destroying entire communities, instilling fear, trampling the rule of law, comes into power, and the question remains, what will the people of the nation do? At the end of the day, friends, as much as I am proud of the excellent legal work that all of us have done and many people in our community have done, I believe that the true freedom of the American people lies in the hearts of the American people. And if they will stand up, we will endure. This committee can count on state AGs, the ones who believe in liberty and justice for all, to continue to fight. None of us are tired, and we can do this longer than they can do this. The lessons of history tell us that leaders who try to deprive people of their rights don't stop at one community. After they've destroyed one, they will go to another and another and another. These are the moments when you have to say no, especially if the community sees its vulnerability, especially if the community sees a leader who's trying to take opportunity away from children, from sick people, from desperate, impoverished people, and harm entire economies. So allow me to say thank you again to this esteemed body, this Congress, this Senate, and House of Representatives who have brought real meaning to the idea of separation of powers. By holding this hearing today, you are doing something important. You're putting ideas and perspective and maybe a little hope for the future in front of the American people. And I want to say thank you for doing that. Melissa Hortman understood that this was important to do. My fellow AGs and I understand this. And clearly, by your invitation here, you understand this. We will keep fighting for the spirit of American belonging. Thank you.
Thank you, General Ellison. General Plotkin from New Jersey.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Senator Durbin and Representative Raskin, for your invitation to testify today. And I want to thank all the members from both the Senate and the House committees for having us and lifting up this work. I was sort of struck as I was coming in here, thought about the first time I ever came into the Capitol. My grandfather was a career naval officer and a federal civil servant. Took me here. It happened to be the day Bush v. Gore was decided. I never could have thought then that I'd be sitting here joined by colleagues that I have such tremendous respect for, AGs Raul, Campbell, Ellison, and Schwab behind us, as well as 18 others who have been fighting systematically now for 5 months against an administration and a president that has been hell-bent on disregarding the law and hurting the residents of our state. As the chief law enforcement officer of New Jersey, it is my job to protect the residents of my state. When anyone violates the law and harms New Jerseyans, I have a constitutional obligation to take action. That's true for opioid distributors and manufacturers who devastated our communities. It's true for social media companies creating a youth mental health crisis. It's true for gun companies profiting off of bloodshed. And yes, it's true for a president who violates the law and hurts people in our states. I know all of my colleagues agree with that. Now, we didn't ask for this fight, but we certainly won't back down from it. So I'd like to highlight briefly 3 ways that this administration's lawlessness and assault on the rule of law has been both unprecedented and deeply damaging to our country. First, this has been discussed, but the administration has flagrantly disregarded the Constitution, as Representative Raskin noted. Just look at the attempt to eliminate birthright citizenship on the very first day of the term. This right was enshrined after we fought a bloody civil war to settle the debate about whether babies born on American soil were in fact citizens of this nation. It's been backed by well over a century of Supreme Court precedent. Nothing gives the president the power to unilaterally strip citizenship from babies born on American soil. That's why I've been proud to lead a coalition of our colleagues in challenging this unconstitutional order. We won a court ruling that stopped this policy from going into effect, and we defended birthright citizenship before the United States Supreme Court last month. We will not back down in the fight to protect this fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution. Second, this administration has undermined public safety at every turn. Instead of working with us to keep our residents safe, the Trump administration is defunding law enforcement and letting weapons of war back onto our streets. They've threatened to withhold funding for critical law enforcement, counterterrorism, emergency services, and disaster relief work unless states redirect criminal enforcement resources to federal civil immigration enforcement at the expense of combating violent crime, drug trafficking, gun violence, and domestic violence. Just last week, we obtained an injunction barring the administration from withholding billions and billions of dollars of critical transportation funding based on these threats alone. In another move that I candidly never could have imagined I would say, but it's true, the administration secretly tried to legalize machine guns last month. They're planning to distribute thousands of devices known as forced reset triggers, which functionally turn a firearm into a machine gun capable of firing up to 900 rounds a minute, more powerful than an M16 in fully automatic state, into our states. Despite being illegal to possess under federal law and extremely dangerous, they plan to send thousands back into our communities, and they won't even so much as tell us where they're going to go. We are leading lawsuits challenging these unlawful and reckless actions that threaten public safety and put Americans in harm's way. We will not let this administration play political games with the safety of our residents. Third and finally, this administration has shown a blatant disregard for the rule of law. I'm particularly alarmed by the president's attacks on law firms, targeting lawyers for doing their jobs and depriving people their First Amendment right to representation. Now, I believe law firms that have capitulated in the face of these threats will be looked on not so favorably as history evolves, but I'm proud to stand with the lawyers and firms that have fought back against these executive orders. All of this is part of an effort to undermine the rule of law, a concept that I understand can seem abstract to many, myself included. But I assure you it was not abstract to people who called our office wondering if their Medicaid card would be accepted by their doctor when President Trump unlawfully froze the health care of 72 million Americans. It was not abstract for the mother who came up to me in tears at my son's soccer game wondering if her autistic son's services were going to be shut off unlawfully. It's not abstract to the brave law enforcement officers who I've spoken to whose services were unceremoniously slashed overnight. These harms are real. They're affecting millions of residents in a host of unprecedented ways. And plain and simple, my fellow AGs and I will not waver in fighting back against the administration when it violates the law and harms our residents. I thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Plain and simple, the rule of law and the foundational principles of this nation are worth fighting for, and we're honored to do it. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Platkin. At this point, we're going to recognize the Democratic leader of the Senate for an opening statement, and then questioning will start with Chairman Raskin.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator Durbin, formerly chairman of the Judiciary Committee, doing a great job as ranking member. And I thank Jamie as well. He's just been such a great leader in so many different ways. So thank you both for holding this hearing, and I welcome my House colleagues. I spent 18 happy years in the House, and reminding me what General Plaskin said, we passed the Brady Law and the assault weapons ban, which have served us well. I was the sponsor of them. And now they're trying to undo them. Right in the reconciliation bill, they have first wanted to take away background checks for silencers. And who needs a silencer? Not the police. They don't like this proposal. Not average citizens. It's people who don't want to be detected, criminals. And it's particularly dangerous when they try to do mass shootings and nobody's able to hear the bullets. And then they added, just the other day, they added shotguns and rifles. So what they're doing in terms of machine guns, they're trying to undo 100 years of law. Now, we're going to bird these things, and we think we have a good chance of winning them, but it's just crazy to all these laws that have helped save lives, that most gun owners support, they're trying to undo, because the right wing runs the Republican Party. But I want to thank our attorneys general for being here, from Illinois and Massachusetts and Minnesota and New Jersey. And we are holding these spotlight hearings, I'm sure Dick and Jamie mentioned this, here in the Senate, because they won't have hearings on the subjects the American people care about. They won't have hearings on just about anything, and then when they have their hearings, they often limit what witnesses we can bring. So we're having these spotlight hearings. We're going to call them shadow hearings, like the shadow cabinet, but that sounded a little shadowy. So instead, we call them spotlight hearings because they put a spotlight on what is going on. And they're often live streamed. Is this one being live streamed? And we get good. Deborah would know. I see a lot of people here who I talked to because of Senate things in the old days. But in any case, the hearings are live streamed, and some of them have gotten hundreds of thousands of people watching. So that's great. We all know President Trump is just continuing to overreach and abuse his power as president, putting our nation at risk. I'll give you, we had a beautiful meeting at one of our caucuses last week. It was sad because of what happened in Minnesota. And our two Minnesota senators got up and talked about it. But at the end, I asked Reverend Warnock, who is still a reverend, as well as a senator, to give him a closing prayer. And he said a line in there that I have now repeated all across New York and the other states that I have visited. Here's what he said. He said that evil always overreaches and contains in itself the seeds of its own destruction. That's what we're doing. That's what we're hearing here. Now, that means we have to fight every day to expose that evil and try to stop that evil whenever we can. But they always overreach and go too far, which they do. So I'd like to thank our two leaders here, Congressman Raskin and Senator Durbin, for doing this. I just want to talk a little bit about litigation in the courts, because each one of you has been involved in litigating against the overreaches, if you will, much worse than that, of the Trump administration and the Republicans in the House and Senate as well. And one of the great things we were able to do when we had the majority is we put 235 new judges on the bench. Progressive judges, 2/3 were women, 2/3 were people of color. You're looking at the team that led the charge. And now, because Senator Durbin was great chairman of the Judiciary Committee doing that, and now they are our first line of defense against when the administration, quote, overreaches. And we have won 97% of the rulings in the courts. And to show you how important it is, they wanted to pass some horrible act called the SAVE Act, which would have returned Jim Crow to voter registration. They tried to pass it in the Senate, and they knew they couldn't get the votes because there you needed 60. But they went to the courts. I was the lead plaintiff. I think you were a plaintiff. To do the same thing, and the courts threw it out, as they should have, because our people are the first line of defense. So now he's using his big, beautiful bill as another way to get around either the Senate or the courts. He's so angry. And by the way, this 97%, a chunk of it comes from judges Trump even appointed. But they were upholding the law, and they knew how he was breaking the law. And of course, that lifetime appointment gives him, you know, the retribution that Trump always visits on his opponents. They're immune from it in some ways, although some judges are not. They're attacking the judges. Anyway, we won 97% of the court, so they go to the reconciliation bill. I have good news. This just happened late last night, that they had snuck in a provision that would stop the courts from issuing injunctions altogether. You had to pay a huge bond, which certainly poor people couldn't pay, but even some of the organizations that do this all the time complain to me, we got it thrown out. So that's 3 things they tried to do to restrict the courts in reconciliation, and we're batting 3 for 3 on nationwide injunctions, on these pay-for-play, and on what the courts, we just got a good ruling on environmental stuff, and they limited what the courts could do there as well. And we're having more success in the committee, in the Byrd process than we had thought we would have, although obviously we don't win everything. But I want to just thank you for being here. You, just like our judges are our first line of defense, you are the people who can seek cases and help us keep this horrible overreach from affecting the American people. And you each have been leaders in that regard. I've worked closely with my Attorney General. I'm a good friend of hers, Tish James. And I welcome you, I thank you for being here, welcome you to this spotlight hearing, and keep fighting.
Thanks, Senator Schumer. We're going to start with questions with Congressman Raskin.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin and Senator Schumer. Thanks for joining us and for your powerful leadership on behalf of the rule of law and the Constitution in New York and all over the country. Your citation of Senator Warnock reminds me of something that Ben Franklin said, where he said, I've observed that wrong is always growing more wrong until there's no bearing it anymore, but that right, however opposed, comes right at last. And so,
Warnock paraphrased Benjamin Franklin.
well, they were thinking along parallel lines, undoubtedly.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you for joining us. I want to recognize my Democratic colleagues who've joined us today. Hank Johnson from Georgia, Ted Lieu from California, Deborah Ross from North Carolina, Chuy Garcia from Illinois, Mary Gay Scanlon from Pennsylvania, and Becca Ballin from Vermont. But I just have a couple of questions for you guys. One is I want to say that when, pursuant to Senator Warnock and Ben Franklin, we get through this nightmare, and we will, and when we reclaim the trajectory of American history for democracy and freedom, and we will, all of you will be remembered by future generations for what you did to stand up for us during this time. And I don't want you to think that anybody doesn't notice, because we do notice what it is you're doing. But I want to ask you this, because in addition to the substantive defense of the rule of law and the Constitution you're engaged in, all of you are also modeling what it means to be an attorney general. Because we've got an attorney general of the United States who literally thinks her job is to be the president's lawyer and to do whatever the president wants her to do, and thinks that the Department of Justice is the law firm for the president and his political party. I mean, that's a remarkable deformation and diversion of American history. So although it's indisputable that all of you are Democrats, I don't think you're here to represent the Democrats or the Democratic Party of your state. And I just wonder if you would say a word about what it means to you to be an attorney general and to try to act on behalf of the rule of law and not a political program. Perhaps Attorney General Rowell, if you'd start.
Thank you for that question. I serve as the Attorney General of the state of Illinois, and in Illinois, I am independently elected from the governor, and by way of that, I serve the rule of law. I don't serve the governor. I do represent the governor. I represent the agencies within state, but I serve the rule of law. And I take that distinction very seriously. And I think that the U.S. Attorney General should operate with the same sort of, she shouldn't be loyal to the president, but she should be loyal to the rule of law. That does not mean you're not representing the government and the administration, but you have to do so within the bounds of the rule of law, and we take
I
that
mean,
very
is
seriously.
there any one of you who would describe your job as being the governor's lawyer? Exclusively, in any way, okay. So I don't know if anybody wanted to add anything else on this. Yes, Attorney General Campbell.
I'll just add, similar in Massachusetts, elected by the people, and I'm accountable to the people in upholding the rule of law and protecting their rights and protecting our state's economy. I would just stress, and I think the NIH case, which we were all a part of, whether it's the first case or even the second iteration of that case, to protect access to these critical life-saving medical research, clinical trials. This is billions of dollars that go to every state in the country. We came together not looking at, okay, how do we just protect those who are Democrats or identify as Democrats in this country? We came together recognizing the unlawful actions by this administration to cut that funding. In NIH won quickly on a Friday night and mobilized to show up in court on Monday because we knew what was at stake. When you talk about a child having pediatric cancer or a vet dealing with PTSD, we don't look at whether or not they have a D or an R by their name. We mobilize to advance that litigation to protect the public health, not even only of those folks in our state, but to protect the public health of everyone across this country while at the same time upholding the rule of law. And I think it's just a great example of a great example of how we do our work regardless of political affiliation or even demographic.
Well, thank you for doing that. And Ellison and Plotkin, let me just twist the question a little bit. One of the things you guys are doing is defending the integrity of federal laws and programs that we've adopted. And because of the very restrictive standing rules that the court has imposed against Congress going to court to try to get our laws implemented, in a weird way, you're standing up for the laws that we've participated in passing. But that's for all of the people, because after all, it's your representatives in Congress who voted for them as well. But I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on that role you're playing in terms of making federal law work for everybody in the country as a state attorney general.
Chairman Raskin, we regard the laws that Congress passes as fundamentally the prerogative of the people who populate this country and send members to Congress. And so for an executive to usurp the role of Congress in appropriations or establishment of agencies or anything like that, we view as an outrageous overreach that simply cannot be tolerated. As I noted in my comments, the things that the president is trying to do, you probably can do if you follow the rules, but you cannot do it vis-a-vis executive order or edict or proclamation or this is how I feel this morning. The fact is that there are procedures that they can follow. They got to go to Congress. You want to abolish the Department of Education, as horrible of an idea as I believe that is, you have to go through Congress to do that. So he's not only doing things that I think are harmful to the American people, he's doing them in a way that is harmful to our system of justice and democracy.
Great. And then finally, forgive me.
I was just going to note, Representative Raskin, that what you said at the start of this is the core of many of the lawsuits we filed. Article 1 gives this body the broadest powers, particularly when it comes to passing laws, spending money. And a bulk of the cases we have talked about and have brought have been the president. When we say he can't act like a king, it means he can't take actions that you have done and put into law, signed into law by a president, passed by a Congress, and decide on a whim that he wants to, say, convert a Department of Transportation highway program into an immigration enforcement program. That is not what the Constitution allows. And so our lawsuits have been about standing up in many ways for the authority of this body to do the important work that it does.
Thank you. I want to recount an experience I had in Chicago last Friday, Kwame, and it's not an unusual one, but I went to the immigration court to watch and to listen. And unlike reported in many parts of the media that these gotaways and others are avoiding the reach of the law in the United States, the people who were there were all there because they'd received a legal notice to appear on a status call for their claims to stay in the United States legally. They brought their families with them, and some had attorneys with them, lots of paper and the like. We know what's happening in some of these cases. These people are appearing for hearings, and the government, the federal government, ICE, is standing up and saying, we're dismissing the charges against this individual, so there's no case to consider, and at that point, detain them and deport them to the country, some country where they once lived. There was that fear in the courtroom. The only difference was the leader of the court there told me that when I announced I was coming to the building that day, the ICE agents announced that none of them were going to be around that day, so I didn't see any. Also, many of these ICE agents are masked and are not identified in any way. These people who are being detained and deported don't have any indication of formal rank of this individual, and they're stuck with it. This, to me, is a clear abandonment of basic due process in terms of what's happening to these people. We're not talking about murderers, terrorists, rapists, people with serious mental illness. You remember the litany that's been recounted to us by President Trump over and over. These are people who are trying to follow the law of America and get their day in court. And it's an awesome process to follow. I would like to ask you, each of you, if you've run into similar abuses of due process in your state and have any suggestions of what we ought to be doing.
Thank you, Senator Durbin, for your question. As you know, I'm a child of Haitian immigrants who went through the immigration process in this country and have contributed greatly to this country, as have millions of other immigrants who have come to this country, including those who are currently undocumented. The notion that the practices being used in Chicago and other municipalities to have some of those who have been complying with the immigration processes and responding to notices to appear and then being detained as a result of them complying with the immigration process is unconscionable and is the furthest thing away from what I understand as due process. There's no definition of due process. I know some have tried to indicate that the notion of due process is different in an immigration context as in others. There's no way that such deceptive practices can be defined in any way as due process. As you know, I am defending what we call the Trust Act within the state of Illinois, which makes certain that our law enforcement resources are not misused for immigration enforcement processes. I know the administration has defined their efforts on immigration as to be targeted towards criminals, but the evidence with regards to those detained reflect a different story. And indeed, each and every one of us here have historically collaborated with our federal law enforcement partners on enforcing criminal laws against citizens and non-citizens, and we will continue to do so. But the notion that these deceptive immigration practices can align with what the purported purpose of this more aggressive immigration enforcement effort is the furthest thing from the truth.
I would just say that if you followed, excuse me, if you followed the questioning that had been asked of judicial nominees over the last 2 decades that I've served on Senate Judiciary during that period of time, it has changed dramatically under the Trump administration. We are now asking nominees to the Department of Justice, even nominees to the bench, whether or not they believe an executive has to follow a court order, or whether they can defy a court order. That is so fundamental to due process and rule of law, and yet you ought to hear the answers we're receiving. A lawful court order, they'll say. Well, who decides if it's lawful? Under Marbury, we know it's the court makes that decision. And yet, that I think is at the heart of whether we will face a constitutional crisis in this country. At this point, I'll turn over to,
If I could try to respond to your
Sure, of course.
question, Senator, I just wanted to say, for the record, that I have looked for and searched for a law prohibiting ICE or from wearing masks. And I haven't found one. Maybe somebody else is aware of it, but I've looked for it and I haven't, my research hasn't turned it up. I think that there might be some reasons for a mask in certain situations. There might be health reasons, certainly during the pandemic, you might see someone wearing a face mask, or maybe there's some undercover reason. But I think that if this body were to pass a law saying, you may not wear a mask to hide your face so that you cannot be identified, so you can avoid accountability, I think that would be a good law to pass. That there may be exceptions, and I don't want to foreclose any, but I think in general, the practice must be that if you are upholding the law and operating legitimately and constitutionally, you shouldn't be afraid to hide your face. And if we veer from that, we will see highly unaccountable conduct flow therefrom. So thank you for allowing me to say that.
thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison, and there is legislation to that effect that is moving on our side anyway. I recognize Congressman Hank Johnson from the 4th District of Georgia, who's the subcommittee chair of our subcommittee on the courts and intellectual property.
Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin, and I also thank Ranking Member Durbin for calling this Spotlight bicameral forum by which we can call forward the Democratic AGs in this country, some of them, and to explain how you and our congressional allies are fighting to defend the rights to freedom that the American people expect. Democratic Attorneys General, thank you for testifying today, and thank you for standing up to this lawless administration and defending our democracy. Most Americans are alarmed by this administration's turn towards autocracy, and I've been telling them that Democratic Attorneys General and Democrats in Congress are fighting these unlawful actions in court and winning. In 34 lawsuits filed by Democratic state AGs and the 4 supporting amicus briefs filed by the Democratic Caucus Litigation and Rapid Response Task Force, there has been overwhelming success, and you have secured court orders blocking the president from carrying out unlawful and unconstitutional actions. The Trump administration is violating the Constitution and federal law as it denies people due process, attacks free speech, arrests judges and politicians, unlawfully guts funding that Congress has appropriated, and federalizes the state National Guard. And Donald Trump has attempted but failed to silence those who oppose his lawless agenda. Despite Trump's threats, there are law firms that have refused to give in to his bullying, universities that have resisted the administration's attempted hostile takeovers, and members of Congress who are still conducting oversight. And of course, attorneys general like yourselves, who are banding together and fighting for the rule of law. We still need citizens to speak up and speak out in the streets every day, but it is crucial that while they are doing that, you all are leading these courtroom battles, so thank you. Attorney General Raoul, in Illinois v. FEMA, you and 19 other Democratic AGs sued to block new Department of Homeland Security conditions that unlawfully tie emergency management and disaster relief funding to state immigration actions. As the leading state in this lawsuit, can you talk about why this case is so important?
In Illinois, as in many Midwestern states, we have tornadoes that have devastating impacts in central Illinois. What connection that has with the immigration enforcement when families are looking for help from their federal and state government to respond to emergencies? None. And just as we've acted in other matters where, again, the administration has acted inconsistent with federal law, with the laws that you all have put in place in Illinois v. FEMA, the administration has done it again, trying to leverage their goal of having an aggressive immigration enforcement, or trying to leverage the need that communities have when responding to emergencies to advance their immigration agenda. I think is, again, unconscionable, and it's unlawful.
Thank you. Attorney General Campbell, in Massachusetts v. National Institutes of Health, you and other Democratic AGs brought a lawsuit challenging President Trump's cut to National Institutes of Health funding, which could affect life-saving medical research. And the House Democratic Caucus filed an amicus brief in support of the states. And happily, a judge issued a preliminary injunction against those cuts. Can you talk about why this case is so important and how helpful it has been to have that amicus brief filed by the Democratic Caucus?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. And it's always helpful to have amicus briefs in supporting a matter. Judges take them very seriously and give them significant consideration, and sometimes they can end up as a footnote once you win a case. That's our posture right now when it comes to supporting Harvard, for example, for standing up, or other higher ed institutions. NIH is critical, to say the least. Obviously, the sole source of federal funding for biomedical research, clinical trials, making sure that we are not only a leader within our respective states on this, but that we are a leader internationally. And Massachusetts is at the center of all of that in many ways. Obviously, every state receives, I would say, millions or billions of dollars from NIH funding. But in Massachusetts, it's not just for the care and the clinical trials and the services it delivers, public health services it delivers to actual constituents. It is a major driver of our economy, both our healthcare institutions, our higher ed institutions. And so you think about NIH funding being cut, that is undermining our economy in Massachusetts. And then you think about the lives, of course, that it is saving. We cannot discount that. In NIH 1, it was a 76-page decision where the judge was very thoughtful and really talking about what it means in terms of saving someone's life. And I just quickly have to say, when you talk about a clinical trial, it is not a matter of missing an appointment and then you can make it up. You miss one part of your clinical trial, it's game over. And so I'm proud of the AGs that step up, not only in NIH 1, but NIH 2, which for us was going back to the drawing board to say, post the NIH 1 decision, this administration continued to play games, canceling grant meetings, not being responsive to the institutions that have been applying for years for this funding. And we had a victory in both cases, most recently in NIH 2, where a judge not only sided with us, but asked this administration to immediately restore that funding, and did not mince his words about the discriminating posture of this administration and found it to be appalling. So we'll continue to fight collectively, not just for our states, but for every state in this country, for folks to have access to this critical research, which is not only sustaining us in Massachusetts, but actually exercises our leadership internationally and our global security, which is equally connected.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Chair Raskin and Ranking Member Durbin for calling all of us together. And it's nice to see my colleagues from the House, especially with Congressman Johnson, with whom, well, I was elected to the U.S. House the same year. And of course, I want to particularly give my aloha to our AG from Minnesota, Keith. We were elected at the same time. So here we are. We're still plugging away. We have a president who does not think that the rule of law applies to him. He is governing through executive orders and taking unilateral actions. And as we all know, there are over 200 lawsuits that have been filed to prevent this regime and this president from continuing in his lawless endeavors. Many of them, and dozens, of course, brought by our state Democratic AGs, including the Democratic Attorney General of the state of Hawaii. So I'm really proud of the fact that you all are fighting back, because the only thing standing between us and the lawlessness of this administration are those of you fighting back through the filing of various lawsuits. And it takes time. We know that the president really, as far as I'm concerned, he doesn't give a rip about our constitutional rights and our protections. So thank goodness for you all. I did have a question. There are a number of questions that I have, but one that comes to mind is his executive order trying to end birthright citizenship. And Attorney General Platkin, you are the lead on this. And I'm not sure how the Supreme Court is going to decide. Apparently, they're not going to get to the merits of whether or not birthright citizenship is a constitutionally protected right, or whether the Supreme Court is simply going to somehow opine about nationwide injunctions and the appropriateness of a nationwide injunction during the pendency of the case. Can you tell us a little bit more about what might happen with the court's decision, which is coming soon? And there are a lot of people who are citizens, thanks to birthright citizenship, who are very concerned about what the Supreme Court could do.
Well, Senator, first of all, let me, in absentia, commend your Attorney General, Ann Lopez, who is an outstanding colleague and part of our coalition, notwithstanding the time difference. She is on all of our calls. You're absolutely right. I was in the courtroom, as was General Campbell a few weeks ago in the Supreme Court. I'm very proud he's here today. Our Solicitor General, Jeremy Feigenbaum, was arguing on behalf of the states. And I think we have to remember how truly remarkable and astonishing it is to hear the United States government, first of all, not even concede that they would follow Supreme Court precedent, which even Justice Coney Barrett sort of was shocked to hear the Solicitor General of the United States say. But to be arguing to the highest court in the land that a baby born in the United States' citizenship should turn on whether the Attorney General of their state joined a lawsuit. That was fundamentally what they were arguing. They weren't even contesting whether this is constitutional, because even they know this is the most unconstitutional order maybe ever signed by a president. But they do think babies in Philadelphia should be treated differently than babies in Camden. And I think we have to remember what that would mean. Well, in New Jersey, we are a small, dense state. A lot of mothers choose to cross the border into Philadelphia to give birth. Is it really the position of the United States government, this is what we were asking, that that child's citizenship turns on whether that mother is at the supermarket when they go into labor across the river?
Well,
We've reached a point of absurdity here that is really dangerous for residents of our country.
And I find it totally absurd that this is a constitutionally protected provision. It is in the U.S. Constitution, and we have a Supreme Court that might base their decision on whether, depending on what every state's attorney general or whoever might be filing a lawsuit, whether that is pursued. It makes absolutely no sense. So this is not a Supreme Court that we can rely upon, as far as I'm concerned, to protect our rights and privileges. You know, there are so many questions relating to the lawlessness of this regime, as I refer to it, but I did want to ask one more thing about them conditioning funding on immigration enforcement. Again, this Attorney General, last week you led a challenge by 20 attorney generals, including Hawaii's, against an attempt by the Department of Homeland Security to condition emergency management and disaster relief funding on the state immigration enforcement. What sort of important funding would be at risk from this kind of reckless tying of federal funds to cooperation on deportations?
And thank you for your question, Senator. Again, I mentioned as an example earlier, the tornadoes that tend to hit Illinois, California has had wildfires. There are disasters of various nature that hit different regions of our country, and our ability to respond should not be contingent upon immigration enforcement. And unfortunately, the prioritization of this administration on trying to find every tool possible to try to compel the states to do what is the federal government's job in terms of civil immigration enforcement. They're going to the lowest of the low to go towards restricting funding that would otherwise help families in their greatest time of need when disasters have hit their homes and their communities.
Just one more comment. I mean, but if the court does not support what you are arguing, then this regime could tie any sort of contracts, funding, grants, all kinds of things on cooperation with them on their goal to deport 11 million undocumented people. Thank you.
That's a fine point. I recognize the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Liu, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Representative Raskin and Senator Durbin, for calling this important bicameral spotlight hearing. And thank you to the attorneys general from the amazing states you're coming from. A number of you I have briefed at the vice chair presentations, so I appreciate you doing that. And I served with Attorney General Ellison. So I'm going to ask some questions of Attorney General Ellison, but all of you are welcome to respond. Last week, I had the honor of meeting with a number of immigrant rights groups, and they were describing horrific incidents where you would have folks wearing masks who we assume were law enforcement agents, maybe not, who were rounding people up, putting them in vans without due process, sometimes using excessive force, sometimes engaging in what looked like arrests that did not have probable cause or detentions that didn't have reasonable suspicion. And none of this had any judicial warrants. So I'm going to ask Attorney General Ellison some questions. The standard for arrest for a law enforcement official to arrest a person is probable cause, correct?
Right.
Skin color, race, and ethnicity does not constitute probable cause, correct?
That's absolutely right. And if I may say so, I mean, we've seen Sheriff Joe Arpaio convicted for contempt of court because he continued to do racial profiling when it came to immigration enforcement. So it's not only statutory law, but there have been a number of cases that find this very point.
Thank you. Now, law enforcement officials can do what's called detaining a person, something less than an arrest, and the standard for that is reasonable suspicion, correct?
That's right.
Skin color, race, and ethnicity does not constitute a basis for reasonable suspicion, correct?
That's absolutely right.
In fact, that would be mass racial profiling if someone did that, correct?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. That's clear precedent.
And so what we're seeing are ICE raids at Home Depots, parks, and other public places with no judicial warrant. So essentially, they're just engaging in mass racial profiling. They're basically just going after people based on their skin color or race or ethnicity. And the problem is, not only that mass racial profiling, you also end up detaining U.S. citizens, detaining people who have the right to be here. And so I urge state officials to look at that and do anything you can to stop that. Sometimes you have people who are bystanders and they film this activity. And I just want to make sure that people who are bystanders can film what ICE agents are doing in the public. They have a right to do that, correct?
Right. You cannot obstruct or but you have a First Amendment right to.
And it's because some folks filmed activity that we have this article from KTLA, a respected local news organization in Los Angeles. The title is Masked Men in U.S. Border Patrol Vests Take Santa Ana Father After Repeatedly Hitting Him. The first sentence of the story is, in a graphic video that has since gone viral on social media, about several more masked men wearing U.S. Border Patrol vests or seen violently detaining a father in Santa Ana before forcing him into the back of an unmarked car on Saturday. That father also happens to be the father of 3 U.S. Marines. And people have the absolute right to film and to send that to the press. So the Department of Homeland Security has said that there's been an increase on assaults on their agents. So let me just first say, anyone assaulting a federal agent or any law enforcement officer, that is a crime. And if you do that, you're going to be prosecuted. At the same time, the Department of Homeland Security wants their agents to be respected. They cannot violate their law. They cannot arrest people without probable cause. They cannot detain people without reasonable suspicion. They cannot engage in mass raids without judicial warrants. They cannot use excessive force. And they should not act like vigilante folks wearing masks. So that's what is happening. And I just want to ask this question to you. If this video is true, and in fact, the Border Patrol agents just beat up a person without justification, can state and local authorities go ahead and charge those federal officials if the Trump Department of Justice does not do so?
What I'll say is that nobody's allowed to break the law or assault somebody. If you are a member of law enforcement and you assault somebody, it would be subject to Fourth Amendment analysis under a case called Graham versus Connor. The law enforcement would be able to would have the affirmative defense of reasonableness, but there is no immunity to assault people by anyone, including law enforcement. As a matter of fact, everybody is subject to the Fourth Amendment. There is an affirmative defense for law enforcement, but there is no blanket permission to use violence against somebody, and certainly none to do it on the basis of racial targeting or profiling or anything like that. I'm not familiar with the case that you mentioned, but I can tell you that in order to arrest somebody on a non-judicial, on a detainer hold or something like that, you have to have objective criteria. It can't simply be race. It can't be national dress. It can't be language. It's got to be stuff like, well, they looked you up and there's no match in the immigration database. There's got to be that there's a removal order for you. It has to be something like you admit that you entered the country unlawfully. It has to be, there could be an expired visa, but it cannot be some criteria such as race, national origin, language, stuff like that. And of course, excessive force is something that the Fourth Amendment does not permit.
Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Ranking Member Durbin. Thank you, Chairman Raskin. Welcome back again over here. It's good to have you here and your colleagues. Great to be with all of you, Attorneys General. I know how busy you are, so I'm grateful that you're here. I spent some time in your shoes, so it's particularly gratifying to have you here. And of course, I'm very, very fond of and respectful of Peter Neronha, who I nominated for U.S. Attorney and helped support in his run for Attorney General, and who has been an important part of your coalition. So let me start with a thank you. You guys all started ahead of the election. You started preparing the groundwork in case things went wrong. When they did, you were ready. You went right to work. You were quick to move. You had good strategy. You worked well with the private groups, the NGOs, Democracy Forward, and others. And so in a really grim time, I think your litigation work has been a great success, and I think history will look back at your achievements as really important to the protection of the values of our country. So seriously, thank you. I've spent a lot of time banging away about environmental issues and climate stuff and the whole fraudulent climate denial operation that the fossil fuel industry has stood up and the capture of government by corporate interests. And one of the things that interests me is that when I look at environmental cases, I see your RAGA colleagues, your Republican Attorney General's Association colleagues, showing up in force in an armada. And what it looks to me is that for not that much money, the fossil fuel industry through American Petroleum Institute, through Exxon, through the KOCH operation, through the Chamber of Commerce, which very often fronts for the fossil fuel industry to give them a little bit of deniability. They basically fund RAGA. Leonard Leo, he's another big RAGA funder, and he's propped up by fossil fuel. So his money flowing through the Concord Fund is probably fossil fuel in its origin. And so they put a couple of $1 million into RAGA, like probably 20, 30, $40 million into RAGA. And what they get for that is free taxpayer-funded legal services, provided in the name of a sovereign state so that they don't have to be quite as out front. And I'm wondering if, and you can take this as a question for the record and get back to me if you'd like, I'm wondering if there are places you think I should be looking to explore more that fossil fuel to RAGA, free legal services for the polluters connection. Because there comes a point when it isn't government any longer. When it looks like government, it has the names of government, but what it really is an industry masked as government attacking its competition so it continue to pollute. And that's the frontier that I'm looking at. And if there are thoughts you have now or thoughts you have later that you can get back to me on, I'd really be grateful for that. Go ahead, General.
Well, Senator, again, thank you, and thanks for all that you do. We all are well aware of the great work you do, and we're grateful for it. Let me say that 2025 will probably be hotter than 2024, which was hotter than 2023, which is hotter than 2022. I mean, today, go outside and you will see a June here in DC and in Minnesota, which is significantly above what historic levels have been. So that's one point I just wanted to make before
It's real.
Yeah, it's a real thing. I joked to my friend today. I said, you know, it's a good thing that there's no such thing as climate change, or else we'd be in real trouble because it's almost 100. It was 101 degrees in Minnesota yesterday. Anyway, yeah, I can tell you in the Minnesota State Legislature, they have introduced legislation to try to curtail my budget on climate and fossil fuel and environmental litigation. They have, my opponent, funded by the fossil fuel industry in the last election, said that his first deed would be to dismiss my climate case. You know, we're not suing because of climate change. We're suing because ExxonMobil and the American Petroleum Institute lied about climate change. You know, we've got
the tobacco model, basically.
Right, essentially tobacco model, but there's documents that, you know, they knew and they said and they lied anyway. They have been working through the legislature to restrict my ability to get interns, to restricted our ability to you know, they would just threaten to dismiss our case, and to call our office and make us explain. And this is all the other side working through them to try to handcuff us. So my point is, your point is well taken, and they don't want to fight fair in court. In fact, we do know that the president himself has actually sent out an executive order saying that we think that these AGs who are challenging the lies and consumer protection deception of the fossil fuel industry, somehow their cases are trying to manipulate energy policy for the United States. No, we're not. This is a simple consumer protection lawsuit.
Yeah.
And so, even the president has got into the act. So I'll stop right there.
He sicked his MAGA DOJ on you. I think my time is up, but another question that, again, just for QFR, since my time is up, very interesting that there's now a row among the far right between the Koch Leonard Leo polluter faction that captured the court and that still puts flotillas of phony front group amicus briefs in front of the court that have an astonishing record of success, like 100%. And the MAGA Trumpster election denier cohort, and they're now fighting with each other over who should own the nomination process and the court. So if anything in that battle pops up that you think would be interesting to us, please don't hesitate to give me a shout. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse and Attorney General Ellison. About the weather in Washington today, you know, we like to say it's not the heat, it's the stupidity. We have now for 5 minutes Congresswoman Deborah Ross from North Carolina. I'm sorry, Scanlon is next. Come next.
Thank you.
Scanlon
Thank you.
from PA.
Thank you to Ranking Members Durbin and Raskin for convening this bicameral spotlight hearing. And thank you to all of our attorneys general for being here to discuss the really critical work you're doing as advocates for the rights and freedoms of your constituents in states all across the country. Since the day he took office, President Trump has been trampling on the rule of law that forms the very foundation of our democracy over and over again with one outrageous attack after the next. His administration is testing the guardrails of our system of government, the separation of powers, the Bill of Rights, due process, and of course, federalism. So the fundamental premise that we are a nation of laws, not men, and that therefore no one is above the law, it's clear that this White House desperately hopes that the accountability system of checks and balances upon power in our Constitution will not hold. And his White House has taken a page right out of the authoritarian playbook by targeting the people who defend the law, fight corruption, speak truth to power, and protect the people's rights. But as millions of peaceful protesters showed last weekend and reaffirmed across the country, America has no kings. So we are really grateful to the service of our attorneys general who are working on behalf of all Americans to hold this administration accountable and challenge its power grabs in court, because you're winning and you're proving every day that our country and Constitution are stronger than one man's political whims or petty vengeances. So you're all doing really important work in so many different areas, but I wanted to focus for a minute on this administration's illegal and unconstitutional attempts to cut billions of dollars of congressionally authorized funding for critical healthcare research. I represent Philadelphia and surrounding counties, so these cuts have had an immediate negative impact in our region. We have 1 in 6 doctors in this country spend some time training in Philadelphia, and we've had some of the most transformative biomedical research happening in our area. But in recent weeks, my constituents are reporting a whole range of negative consequences from the cuts to existing research programs. So what we've heard just in the last few months from these cuts is that life-saving research, such as ovarian cancer trials, are being disrupted. And trial participants are being told they can no longer receive the treatment that for many was their last best hope. Accomplished research personnel are being laid off, threatening their livelihoods, kneecapping our medical sector's ability to innovate, and increasingly risking that they're going to be forced to relocate to other countries. Internships are being canceled, so college students and our next generation of researchers are not able to get the training that will help them become the next wave of innovators. And finally, to preserve multi-year research projects in the face of this sudden, unannounced funding shortfall, universities are canceling capital projects. So that means sheet metal workers and other construction workers are being laid off because those programs can't go forward. And of course, we've got the overall loss of medical knowledge. So Attorney General Campbell, you've really been leading a lot of the fight against these cuts. Can you talk more about the research you see being endangered and why the cases you're leading are so critical to the health of your constituents in Massachusetts, mine in Pennsylvania, and folks across the country?
Thank you, Representative, for the question, but also the broad and expansive frame here. I'm really proud, as I said earlier, of the response from my colleagues in coming together to protect access to all NIH funding, because it's not just about the life-saving piece of a clinical trial, for example, that is under threat. It is about jobs, internships. We had a researcher at Harvard working on antibiotics. It's about our global standing in the world when it comes to how we're advancing that medical research, and that job is now under threat. We have Mass General Brigham in Massachusetts, which receives patients from all around the world, the largest recipient of NIH funding, that has had to cut various programs because of the uncertainty. So I'm always careful, I think, in defining how we're winning, because I never want to discount the real harm that people are suffering and experiencing, even as we sit here. You can't just turn back on a clinical trial, and if you've missed one part of it, that can mean all of your clinical trials going forward are over, and that means life or death for an individual, for a family, for a child. So I am, at the same time, hopeful and optimistic about the response from the courts here, both Democratic and Republican appointed judges who recognize the unlawful violations and actions of this administration to undermine not just the NIH funding in our respective states, but the public health infrastructure of our country. And this has to do with our global security as well. It has to do with our economy as a whole. And then if you think about it, affordability is still the #1 issue. It also, of course, creates uncertainty with respect to what people have to pay to get the care they so desperately need, along with the jobs they so desperately need. So we're very grateful for the preliminary injunction that we won back in April. We're also grateful of the recent decision we won in NIH2, pushing the envelope a little bit in terms of what the law could do to protect folks and organizations that are seeking this funding, including those folks who were granted the funding, but then the administration unlawfully cut it off. So we're going to keep fighting the fight with respect to this funding, regardless of what political affiliation is by someone's name or what state they are in. And we will continue to do it with a sense of urgency.
Really appreciate your work on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Markey?
Thank you so much. This administration's actions are straight out of an authoritarian playbook. We have seen troops being deployed in response to protests, U.S. senators and others being pushed to the ground or arrested for asking questions, the weaponization of federal agencies against political enemies, retaliatory attacks against institutions such as Harvard University, masked ICE agents grabbing students and immigrants off the streets of Massachusetts, Tufts University, Rumesa Ozturk, and then moved to a prison in Louisiana with no charges for a month and a half made against her and others. The intimidation of institutions into silence. We have crossed a dangerous threshold from which we cannot return unless we call out what it is: authoritarianism, dictatorship. So, Attorney General Campbell, I know that you've been fighting this climate of fear and abuse of power that is emanating from the Trump administration towards the state of Massachusetts. So what actions are most concerning to you that you've seen in Massachusetts, Attorney General?
Thank you, Senator. I think I'll lift up two. First, I do think we all are concerned about the birthright case, not only because it is about protecting the rule of law, it is also indicative of an administration that is looking to advance an immigration policy that is targeting babies and unborn babies. In addition to that, I'm reminding folks that it's also broader than just the rule of law and immigration. I can't sit here without the 14th Amendment. I can't vote. I can't run for office sitting in this identity. So I think it's a great case to lift up for those folks who are maybe not paying attention as to what's at stake here. We don't have a functioning economy without the rule of law. We don't have your ability to seek out opportunity without the rule of law. We don't have our ability to have a contract with our government to get the best of government delivered to you without the rule of law. So I think pulling that apart as to what it means and what is the magnitude of it is important. And I've been telling folks, regardless of how you feel about the 14th Amendment, well, pick the amendment that you like, because they can come after that one too. So that, I think, has been most concerning, including in the rhetoric I'm hearing on the ground. The second is everything we're seeing related to ICE. Adrian Raul lifted up earlier what we're seeing, of course, in Illinois, but it's true in California and other places. You mentioned Rumesa. This was a student who was here lawfully, as you know, who was just walking down the street, stopped by some strangers, and I don't encourage folks to look at videos. This one I've been telling folks, look at this video. Walking down the street, she stopped by folks who do not identify themselves, masked, unidentified, with no badges to identify who they are or who they represent. Immediately in the video, you can see the fear that enters her body. and you can't miss it. And instantly, she thinks she's just walking by people who are in her way and essentially saying, like, excuse me, and they grip her. And then they take all of her belongings, put her in handcuffs, and throw her in an unmarked van and take her away. For 24 hours, I, along with many colleagues, including you, Senator, and so many others, used our authority, our power, our relationships to try to find out where she was, and we couldn't. And then we learned, of course, she was moved around and ultimately ended up in Louisiana. We were able to support her immigration lawyer, offering whatever resources we could to get her released. I have spoken to her. She's an amazing, as you know, human being, just amazing with her in terms of her resiliency, but also her ability to sort of support our efforts to help others. But what's tragic is, even while we were fighting the fight, she was detained for months. We had a high school student in Milford, as you know, in Massachusetts, no public safety record whatsoever, similar to Ramesa. Here, just heading to practice, just picked up off the street, teenager, and ICE and local authorities would have you or have us believe that they were doing it all to promote public safety, which is total nonsense. They were doing it to create fear in our communities, and they're continuing to do that. So I am absolutely concerned about what is happening on the streets of Massachusetts. We are doing everything in our power collectively to hold the administration accountable, not just through our litigation efforts to protect due process, but also putting out guidance, and most recently, guidance in Massachusetts we put out on what people should expect in terms of their engagement with ICE, the authority that they have and that they don't, for bystanders, for those being detained. We're helping people access lawyers in real time, folks get bond, you name it, we're doing our part. But I think it's equally important to name, as we're doing our part to fight this fear and horrific pain that it is causing, it is also at times undermining our ability to advance public safety. Because we had relationships with these law enforcement agencies doing great work to remove guns and drugs off the street, and that work has not slowed down. And now we have federal agencies who are not communicating with us, who are undermining our work, creating fear on the ground. So when our folks do go out to advance public safety, they will be met with distrust. So we're doing everything we can, but I do hope folks continue to mobilize in the streets. It makes a difference. We'll continue to work with you and this incredible body on laws that can be changed to hold ICE accountable in the same ways we can hold our local law enforcement accountable, which is a bit different because our state laws differ than some of the federal laws that govern ICE. I'm sorry for talking a bit long, but I think that is top of mind for everyone, the rule of law, but also what is happening in our communities with respect to ICE.
100%. Romesa Ozturk was entitled to due process.
That's right.
She was not receiving it. She had a right of First Amendment right of free speech. It was just an op-ed in a college newspaper, and yet they had whisked her away. That's why Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Congressman Jim McGovern and I went down to her prison to go in to meet with her, to put the spotlight on her, the same way that the ACLU in your office was putting a spotlight on her to get her released. And the same thing is true for Marcelo Gomes, the 17-year-old young man who's an honor student who was arrested by ICE. They thought it was his father, and they knew he wasn't almost immediately, but they kept him behind bars for 6 days without any charges made against him. It's a climate of fear. It's something that we really appreciate you fighting in Massachusetts and being a national leader on. So I thank you so much for being here today.
Did Senator Klobuchar, did you need to go? Or, oh, okay. Congresswoman Ross. Very nice.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Senator Durbin and Congressman Raskin, for organizing this very important hearing on this topic. As we all know, this is a lawless president and a lawless administration. They will keep violating the law until they are told they are not allowed to do it. And thank you for everything you are doing as Attorneys General. I'm glad that you've taken our new Attorney General in North Carolina, Jeff Jackson, our former colleague, under your wing. He is fighting so hard in these cases. And I was thrilled to join him in one of the very first cases challenging the fact that the Trump administration was pulling back resources from our nonprofits and many of our NGOs. And I hope that that lawsuit is as successful as this NIH lawsuit. I know we've talked about the NIH lawsuit a lot, but I must talk about it a little bit more because I represent the Research Triangle area in North Carolina. And so many of the research institutions in my area, and thank you, Attorney General Campbell, for pointing out, so many of the other economic engines of the Research Triangle are reliant on this NIH funding. But we can't forget the human face. As I was sitting in this hearing, I heard from a constituent who wanted to know, when's my trial going to start again? I'm sick. I'm worried. And as we all know, when you guys get these amazing injunctions, you have to show both that the Trump administration has violated the law, likelihood of success on the merits, and you have to show irreparable harm. And just this woman who I got a message from here is a demonstration of this irreparable harm. So I want to congratulate you, Attorney General Campbell, on getting this far and actually getting a permanent injunction. But what I've heard from many of the folks in the biomedical sphere in my area is they're afraid that the Trump administration will slow walk the remedy, much as we saw in Brown versus Board of Education, with all deliberate speed. And then that will mean that these life-saving drugs and these trials will be permanently gone because you can't get people back. You can't get the data back. So could you tell me how you are working to get this particular order enforced as quickly as possible, what the state of the appeal is, and then when you're finished, for anybody else who wants to talk about how we are going to get this justice as quickly as we can.
And I do invite my colleagues to chime in, particularly on NIH and how it's affecting them in their respective states, because all have stories of life and death, frankly. Hence why we are collective in our efforts to protect all funding related to NIH. This victory most recently in NIH 2 is a big deal. And what we're finding, I think what is true for all federal funding cases where we are winning decisions to protect this funding, either to turn it back on or to stop the administration from turning it off, is that if we need to, we can go back into court with the judge who issued the very order and have them be the plater, the stakeholder to push the administration to do what they are calling them to do with respect to that order. I would say in many of our funding cases, we are indeed, and I can say here, winning because the funding has been turned on or was never turned off in the first place because of some of our victories, not just for NIH. Sometimes we have to equip people with the very order itself to be able to share that with various folks to get funding turned back on, seeing in the context of even my librarians who I just saw recently. And at the same time, trying to also remind the courts, once we've won an order, that there is still risk. So for example, I'm using not to discount NIH, but in the library context where we won a preliminary injunction immediately to protect access to cultural institutions and to libraries, I did have some librarians say they still had to cut certain services because of the chaos and confusion. If there is an appeal, for example, they don't know how to respond to that chaos and confusion, even though we won the PI. So it's our ability or our opportunity to continue to go back into the court to remind judges how they might have to be even more creative in crafting a remedy and response. And then, of course, to push the administration to respond to an order. But so far, we have been winning, but it will always come with real harm. This is why elections matter.
I can chime in. I joined in co-leading in NIH, and like many of these actions, it's a personal one to me. My father was a physician who I lost to prostate cancer, and the practice of medicine has evolved since the time he practiced because of research. And I myself was later diagnosed with the same, and I was very public about it and have given advice since to people who were diagnosed subsequent to me. What I've learned in that process is the science has changed. It has evolved. The science of diagnosis, the science of treatment. And so my experience from just 9 years ago is a bit different than somebody who may be diagnosed today, either in diagnosis or in treatment. And that's a good thing. And we should continue to advance in research. And so when we decided to take action on this, it's a very personal one to me. And as A.G. Campbell said earlier in her initial remarks, this does not just impact us in blue states, right? There are research institutions in the red states that are impacted as well. And I would beg upon my colleagues who serve as AGs on the other side of the aisle to join us in this fight, because their institutions would otherwise suffer as well.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Chair, for holding this hearing and for inviting these great four attorney generals, including my longtime friend Keith Ellison. We came into Congress together and have been friends ever since. And I know, Keith, that you commented about the horrific murder of our friend Melissa and her husband Mark. I just heard from Yvette, the wife of Senator Hoffman, and they're both recovering after each suffering 8 gunshots, 9 the other, and they continue to recover. And thank you and all the law enforcement, Minnesota, local, state, federal, work together to get this madman behind bars. So we have seen, as you know, Attorney General, an increase in political violence. Judges, local officials, Capitol Police investigated last year more than 9,400 threats against members of Congress. That's up from about 1,900 threats in 2016. It's been a major shift, and this is going to involve more security and the like. But one of the things I think you know I've been focused on for a while is what goes on the platforms, and that this stuff is just repeated. You and I have had our own experience with this together in one post, and then I'm in real time dealing with something now related to this assassination. But could you just talk about what you think needs to be done? Because they take things that are lies and then they don't take down the ones that maybe are not news but are actually fake news.
Well, I don't think you have a First Amendment right to lie. I don't think you have a First Amendment right to threaten and commit crimes against others. You don't have a First Amendment right to do any of those things. And quite honestly, I think that the platforms have to be held accountable for the things that they allow, and in some cases even promote on their platform.
Because of the algorithms.
Well, I was going to say because of the algorithm, but more recently, the person who owns Twitter or X was actively engaging in his own platform in false statement and lies regarding the tragedy in Minnesota. And so it's one thing to say, oh, I'm neutral, this platform, people say what they want. But if you own the platform and you get on the platform and you promote lies yourself, then I think that that is an occasion where you're no longer just a host of a platform, you're a publisher. Mm-hmm. And you are purveying information. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's a lot of reason why we need to get a handle on these platforms. Again, subject to all regular First Amendment rules.
Correct.
Right?
Parity, all of those things, but there are ways we could put rules in place.
I certainly think so, and I think that the problem is that we simply have not seen the majority take these matters seriously. But they should, though, because quite honestly, political violence, if we're very candid, I believe statistically it does happen more on the right today, but it's not like it doesn't happen on the other side. Mm-hmm. I served with a congressman where every Democrat and every Republican was shocked, appalled, and condemned when the baseball practice was attacked, and we had a member who was severely injured, and not just one. And so this was something that does. It's not. I would not say that it's even, but I would say that it does occur on both sides. So we both have an interest in reducing the violent political rhetoric. And if I may add just one quick point, I don't think that means we have to not passionately advocate for things we care about. But it means that violence cannot be a part of the dialogue. It cannot be what we allow.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have, I think, just time for one more question, but I did want to thank you, AG Rawl, for you and some of the other AGs, including our own, taking on that tariff case. I think you know from a Midwestern state how important that is and just how devastating this is to our economy. I wanted to thank you. I know you've been talking, AG Campbell, about the NIH suit, Home and Mayo Clinic. We care about this a lot, so thank you. But my very last question, you, Mr. Platkin, about the freezing of some of these law enforcement, domestic violence grants and the like. I actually carry along with Senator Murkowski the COPS reauthorization, and I've also done a lot of work in the domestic violence area. And I'm really concerned for an administration that, you know, talks the talk about law enforcement and then is freezing these grants, the impact of that. Could you answer that? Thanks.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thank you for your leadership on those issues. I think this is the most anti-law enforcement administration in modern American history, starting on day one when they pardoned people who killed an officer who was from the state of New Jersey. One night I came back from an interfaith event to find that millions of dollars for domestic violence services, gun violence prevention, license plate readers, all of which this body appropriated for those purposes that keep us safe, were unceremoniously cut without justification. This is happening to law enforcement across the country. And it's related to the question you asked my colleague from Minnesota, because the funding cuts, as devastating as they are, make no mistake, law enforcement, I mean, I got a notice that the HIDTA program was frozen in the state of New Jersey. I don't think they realized I was on the email chain. As devastating as those are, when you combine it with, for the first time that I am aware of, a fundamental breakdown in communication because the federal government doesn't want to coordinate with state and local services. It's not the other way around, make no mistake. It is the federal government deciding that they do not want to coordinate with state and local law enforcement. What happens? We don't have the resources to respond, and we don't have the communication to make sure we're seeing threats and responding to them in real time. And I can give you one very specific and quick example that will highlight this. We had a case, an attempted murder case, where the victim, person stabbed in the neck, was an undocumented immigrant. Guess who ICE picked up? The victim. Guess who we couldn't call because they wouldn't take our calls? The United States Attorney's Office. So when that happens, do we think more domestic violence victims are going to pick up the phone and call 911 or less? And it's having a real impact on the ground in New Jersey and across the country. And I think you have all highlighted this. It is so important for the public to see that this law and order administration is frankly anything but.
I remember my former job, as Keith knows, as Hennepin County Attorney, and we would actually have perpetrators that would try to go after immigrants because they thought maybe then they wouldn't talk. And we'd use that as evidence, and then there were, of course, provisions made so they could come forward and then put the bad guy away. And when that goes away, we're going to have an even bigger increase. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I recognize the distinguished gentlelady from Vermont, Ms. Ballant, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin, and thank you, Senator Durbin, for pulling us together today. And certainly a special thank you for all of you. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate you being here today. I want to focus my remarks building on what others have said about the Trump administration's attack on science. And facts and science still matter. They still matter to Americans. Supporting scientific research has to continue to be a national priority. And some things have to exist outside of the political partisan debate. And one of those things, of course, medical research, right? Scientific advancement, an area where we have been a world leader. But that's not going to continue to be the case under this administration if it continues to attack the scientific community. So as we discussed a little bit earlier, you see this administration attempting to illegally slash research grant funding, funding that we appropriated, that Congress appropriated. And from what I can tell, Trump is doing this for two main reasons. One, he claims that research that is being done is too woke, which I think is a cover for that he doesn't actually understand the research. Either way, his administration continues to ignore the experts, and he fundamentally doesn't believe in making the necessary investments in our national scientific research. And this administration continues to nickel and dime scientists. And of course, this puts us all in a very dangerous situation. Our status as the leading nation in the world for science is being severely threatened right now. We see researchers and scientists deciding to leave our country and go overseas, which is a reverse of what happened during World War II when people came here because this was the safe place to do research. You have a situation where we, of course, will not benefit from this. Our constituents won't benefit from it, but the world won't benefit from it. And ultimately, I don't want Republicans in my doctor's office, and I really do not want them in the science lab either. So we have to continue these public investments, and these grants and cuts are irrational, and they conflict with the will of Congress. But as you spoke to, it's not just the will of Congress, it's the will of the people. It's what Americans want us to be doing with our money. And so your individual and collective work matters. I don't think that any of us feel like we're fighting as much as we need to in this moment because it's so grave. We're working as hard as we can, but I want you to know what you're doing does matter, and we see it, and it gives us courage to keep fighting. And so if I could start with Attorney General Campbell. Massachusetts obviously is a center of so much research. You've been on the front lines of pushing back against these hurtful and, as I said, illogical cuts to NIH. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the strategies that the Trump administration is using to slow or cancel grant funding. What should we be looking for? What can we be doing to fight back as well?
Well, thank you, Representative, and I have to lift up your colleague, A.G. Clark, who we all work with very closely, and my husband's from Vermont. My mother-in-law is still there. So.
Oh, represent! I didn't know
Yes,
that.
so
All right.
she's 86, young and fabulous. So I didn't know I'd be able to give her a shout out. So hello, Mimi. So in all seriousness, NIH too, I think, speaks a little bit to your question, and grateful for Illinois, but AG, the state of Illinois, but AG Raoul for just continued partnership, because what we heard is post the first lawsuit where we challenged the indirect cost issue, which on a Friday night, they said they were just going to cut in indirect costs. And Massachusetts gets billions. I think in fiscal year 2024, we got over $300 billion just in that one fiscal year. So immediately mobilize, one, to remind the public what indirect cost means. It's the laboratory itself, it's the human capital, it's the equipment. You can't do research without all of that, even though the administration would have people think otherwise. Yeah. So one on that, but then what they attempted to do was manipulate the response from the court in many ways and cut grant meetings. They had gone through the scoring process with so many institutions that have gone through this process for years. And once you go through a scoring process, for example, you then have an expectation based on previous conduct by the administration that you will show up and have meeting number one or meeting number two, guaranteeing that you will get a certain amount of money, which then informs your budget.
Of course.
So the meetings were canceled, or grants that were already contracted or promised were suddenly under threat. Or canceled, or they were threatening to cancel those grants. So we went back into court on NIH2 and just recently won that, which is significant because it is not only indicative of what we can do as AGs collectively in response to grant funding where they directly cut it off, but also where they're playing games to threaten that funding. It's also a huge victory. So we will see what will continue to happen going forward, but we'll continue to think outside the box based on what we hear from institutions on the ground on how we can respond legally. And then, of course, through our engagement with the lawyers from the DOJ in these cases, also push them to do their part in turning on sources of funding or to maintain them.
I mean, you spoke to a really important point that gets lost in all of this, which is that science involves incredible planning.
Right.
Obviously,
Years of it.
right? Exactly, years. I know I'm short on time. I do want to just ask you if you could just speak to just the impact that these cuts have on regular people. Why should Americans care so deeply about these cuts to these research programs?
Well, I will say, and almost lift up what was said before, it's, one, we're talking about life-saving treatment for almost every disease you can think about. And if you find yourself in a situation where your doctor has diagnosed you, for example, with cancer, or your child with pediatric cancer, I would hope that you would want your medical institutions to do everything they could, offer you all the care they could, to be able to save you or your child's life. And when you have an institution, a Trump administration, and their respective institutions seek to intentionally cut this funding overnight, it causes life and death situations for us on the ground. But it also, in addition to that, it creates jobs. I mentioned the healthcare institutions earlier in Massachusetts. Healthcare institutions, higher ed institutions, even tech companies. The foundation in many ways of our economy in Massachusetts, of our international standing in the world, is now undermined because of these cuts. And then lastly, which can't be discounted, is our global standing. Or what A.G. Raoul said earlier about the advancements that we make here in this country, in Massachusetts and beyond, to advance clinical research, leading and cutting-edge research to solve the most pressing diseases where we hope in the next generation we're all gone, they are gone. Critical in not only what will come, but also, as A.G. Raoul mentioned earlier, this ability to craft new medicines and new responses to some of the same diseases that will save more lives. So I will never understand why they targeted and continue to target science, public health, NIH, the Science Foundation funding, or others, but know that you have AGs who are here and others who are not, who will stand up to continue to fight.
Thank you so much for all you're doing. And, you know, I just want to say that we all have to continue to find ways to communicate more clearly to Americans about what is happening right now. Because I know people are exhausted and checking out because they're so overwhelmed. So you being here matters. It gives us another opportunity to highlight the importance of
Thank
it.
you,
So
Ms.
thank you so
Ballin.
much.
Thank you so much, and thank you.
Congressman Raskin, if I'm not mistaken, the next senator was a former member of the House Judiciary Committee.
Very much so. It's an honor to be here with Senator Schiff.
Senator Schiff, California.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin and Chairman Raskin, for putting this hearing together and for all your leadership on both of these important committees. I wanted to ask you all your thoughts on how the administration is handling the immigration issues. In LA and in California, we are the epicenter of the indiscriminate arrests, detentions, family separations, the militarization of the Guard, the Marine Corps, the deployment of law enforcement, or rather military for law enforcement purposes. There's so much to ask. Let me just start with one issue, and that is the ethnic profiling of people. They're grabbing people off the street. They're claiming they're looking for one person at times and just grabbing whoever they get. Other times they don't even know who they're arresting or detaining. Courts have ruled they're not allowed to profile in this way. We're having citizens and non-citizens alike who are being arrested because of their appearance. And yet it goes on, and it's going on every day. What can be done to enforce the court orders that have already said you can't just profile someone and arrest someone without probable cause or reasonable suspicion or any other basis apart from their ethnicity?
Well, we can take action in courts. As you know, the federal government is the government of limited powers. The states, all other the 10th Amendment are left to the states. And one of those federal powers, one of those federal responsibilities is in the area of immigration, but it's not unlimited. They cannot racially profile, they cannot use national dress, language, things like that. As you said, there's plenty of court cases on this. And in the past, we have brought amicus briefs and other action to try to bolster the petitions of certain groups. I remember when I was on Trump 1, we actually filed an amicus when Trump tried to terminate TPS for Liberian immigrants because he had recently said those ugly remarks about, S-hole countries. So we're not without tools to stop the ethnic profiling, the racial profiling. And it is something that we meet on a regular basis. We talk about these things on a regular basis, and it's something that we certainly need to look at. What powers can AGs bring to stop the racial profiling? I think it's perfectly legitimate and something well within our ability to take a close look at. If I may, I just want to just note, Trump recently said that he was concerned because some of his big donors, their employees in the area of agriculture and hospitality, are being impacted by his policy. And so what he's really saying is that he might let these donors exploit workers unfairly and maybe not do his anti-immigrant thing against this particular set. And then he, of course, a few days later pulled back off of that. But the irrationality is what I'm talking about. It is inherently arbitrary. It's capricious. And, the federal government is not allowed to act in an arbitrary, capricious manner. It must act rationally based on thought and planning and fairness. And so thank you for raising these issues. There's something that all of us are deeply concerned about and will focus our attention on.
General Ellison, I appreciate it, and I think what we're seeing and what we need to combine our forces on is increasingly they're just ignoring the court orders. We're winning in court, and they're just ignoring the court orders, and they feel in the same way they want to flood the zone with excrement in other areas, they flood the zone of violation of court orders, and by the time you go back to court and back to court and back to court, they've continued to arrest and detain people on the basis of their appearance. Let me turn to a related concern, and that is they're making some of these arrests in courthouses. This seems to be part of their new modus operandi. Of course, immigrants are more likely to be witnesses in those courthouses than defendants, but what are you seeing happen? Are you seeing immigrants not willing to come and testify in criminal cases anymore because they have fear that they might get detained? And what's more, what are attorneys recommending to clients that have immigration appointments? We had this horribly heartbreaking case, which is just one of many, of a Californian who went to an immigration proceeding with his son, showed up the way he's supposed to, and is arrested and then deported away from his son. And then his son is also deported. But what do attorneys now recommend to their clients? Can attorneys show up in lieu of their client to make the appearance? Or how are people supposed to handle the conflicting obligations to show up for a court appearance with the fear that that court appearance is going to be abused to arrest and detain and deport them?
Well, the courts we have most influence on are state courts, and we've been urging we've been raising this issue that witnesses, defendants, victims simply won't show up to court. We have seen people express tremendous fear about this. We've seen some of the sectors where there are mercados or other sort of ethnic groceries where people aren't going there anymore. We've seen schools that have a lot of immigrant children not show up for school. One of the things that we're advocating for with our state courts now is to have more video hearings so that people can have some sense that they can be heard without having fear that ICE is going to show up and take this action or other. And recently they have changed. Historically there has been this idea that sensitive areas are places where ICE should not be there because they could interfere with the administration of justice. Well, the administration has crossed that out. So we are in a tough situation when it comes to this, but I think there are things we can do. Video hearings are one thing that I know that we're talking about in Minnesota.
Chairman, can I ask one last follow-up question?
Sure, if you can make it quick. Okay, Congressman Gertz has been very patient here, so please.
Will you indulge your old colleague? The Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit recently rendered the term "through the governor" superfluous when it comes to nationalizing the Guard over the opposition of the governor. And the issue of the use of the Marine Corps to detain or participate in any way in law enforcement is being challenged in court. We suspect this playbook is going to be repeated in your states as well. What preparations are you making for the potential activation, mobilization of your guards over the opposition of your governor and over the opposition of law enforcement in your states?
Well, obviously, I disagree with the interpretation of the Ninth Circuit with regards to basically rendering the governor's power of having the power to consent to the activation of the Guard in our respective states. I've been in touch with our governor with regards to our preparation in the state of Illinois. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has politicized his prioritization of states that are being targeted for aggressive immigration enforcement based on party affiliation, not on general immigration policy. We continue to try to litigate the best we can. And if I could touch on your prior question for a moment, I think there's limitation in what we can do by way of the courts. And I, as Attorney General, I have to acknowledge that. And I have a young daughter who's a rising 3L, and I've asked her to pay attention to the words of Chief Justice Roberts as he spoke to Georgetown law students and cautioned them that the rule of law is under threat and that we need to enhance our civics education. I think what the Chief Justice was talking about is that, yes, we've had some successes, that we have had some successes in the courts, but we're not going to be able to achieve everything in the courts. And we've got to educate the public at large as to our Constitution, the basics of our Constitution, not make constitutional scholars out of them, but understand the basics such that the people can speak and resist a president who says he doesn't know whether or not he has to follow the Constitution.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're a little over time, but if I may, Senator, if there is one thing that converts a society from a free society to an authoritarian society, it is use of the military against the population for dissent. This thing in California has me sleepless, quite honestly, and I just want to point out that deference to a executive, when that executive is not bound by common norms of law and decency, is essentially unleashing military rule on a society. And I really, I mean, I've heard that in California they are going to raise this issue higher to the next level. We don't know what'll happen there, but I'm telling you, if there's one thing that will cause irrevocable harm to American democracy, it is the military turned against American citizens, and all under the rubric of public order, when both the governor and the mayor of the city are saying, we really don't need your help at all. That's undisputed. They don't need, LA doesn't need Donald Trump's help. I'll stop right there.
Thank you, General Ellison. Senator Schiff?
I was just going to say, General, I totally agree with you, but it would have been nice if the Chief Justice thought about that before he gave the President of the United States immunity to commit criminal acts while in office.
I now will recognize the very distinguished gentleman from the 4th District of Illinois, Mr. Garcia, who's been such a leader on so many of the things we've been talking about today.
Thank you, ranking members. Raskin and Durbin for this very timely convening. And of course, to all the Attorney General that are here today and have been leading the fight against this administration's lawlessness, including my friend A.G. Raul from Illinois. It's hard to believe that it's only been 5 months since Trump was sworn into office and that he and his lapdogs have done everything to weaponize the federal government to serve their corrupt, criminal, cruel, and racist agenda. This isn't about America first. This is about Trump first. And it's an openly authoritarian movement that demands obedience to its leader, who has violated the law in so many ways that it's hard to quantify. In this perilous moment, I'm grateful that we have a group of attorneys general who are fighting back, not just because of policy disagreements, but because of what's on the line, and that's constitutional rule. Attorney General Raul, thank you for being here, and of course, thank you for everything that you do to protect the rights of people in Illinois and around the country. Can you, even though we touched on it already, explain the importance of the lawsuit over birthright citizenship, the executive order, and why this is personal to you?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. And I thank New Jersey on their leadership. I was born to a Haitian immigrant mother who was not yet naturalized at the time of my birth, so I am a birthright citizen. And I know that there are many like me who have contributed to this country, including more recent birthright citizens. Fundamentally, the language in the 14th Amendment, it goes beyond just the topic of birthright citizenship. The language in the 14th Amendment is plain. And this was one of our very first lawsuits. And to the extent that the administration is going to violate a constitutional amendment that is so clear in its language, we are very much threatened in every subject matter area. The judge, as it was, I believe it was mentioned earlier, spoke about, I think it was Ranking Member Raskin mentioned, how any lawyer could come in and present an argument with regards to it. But he also said it was just blatantly unconstitutional. The language of the 14th Amendment is clear. If you're born here, you're a citizen here.
Thank you. And changing gears, can you talk a little bit about the work to prevent the dismantlement of the Department of Education? And if that were to occur, what's the harm, what's the damage being done to children and students and parents and teachers, all of the implications of that EO if it came to fruition?
Yes, Congressman, as you know, my former basketball teammate was the former Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, and we've discussed the damage in particular to some of the most vulnerable students, students with disabilities that services through the Department of Education go towards helping their students who won't have access to the processing of financial aid such that they can attend schools. There's funding that helps school districts in some of the most vulnerable areas of our state that will be disadvantaged by dismantling the Department of Education.
Well, thank you and your colleagues for your work on that front. And finally, to a former member of the House from the state of Minnesota, last week, General Ellison, 3 colleagues and I went to an ICE processing center that's now been turned into a detention center. We stood in the hot sun in the morning. People had been in line already because they had appointments. They were checking in as they were requested to do so. We identified ourselves. It was hot, almost 2 hours. They would not open the door. When they finally sent someone to talk to us after I yelled through a fence on the side, a gentleman came over, masked, nameplate concealed, and told us that if we wanted to request access to that facility, we had to send an email. I corrected him and told him we had every right to be there. Was I within what the law states? And what do you think about that experience for 4 members who are seeking to interview constituents that we had reason to believe were at that center, and the denial of our ability to conduct oversight?
It's outrageous. It's wrong. And we have to loudly protest it. We have to seek out all remedies available to not allow this kind of behavior to occur. The mask issue is something deeply disturbing, as I noted a little earlier, and I think you heard me. I've done the research on whether or not there is a mask or no mask requirement for ICE agents. There doesn't appear to be, but there should be. And it's something that I really hope that we can see get passed. And I think a lot of people on both sides of the aisle will agree that it should be. It's outrageous and it's wrong, but I hope you'll allow me to just say, you asked AG Raul about education. Think about it this way. They want to attack Head Start. They want to attack Job Corps. They want to attack K-12 education if you have DEI. They want to attack libraries and museums. They want to attack NPR and PBS. They're literally trying to dumb down America if you look at it in a comprehensive way. Why are they attacking every way that the public gets to know about stuff? Just a thought.
Thank you. Chairpersons, I yield back.
Thank you very much.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Ranking Member Durbin. Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin, for bringing us together. Great idea to have you here. Which of you would like to change jobs with me? You know, I did your job in Connecticut for 20 years. My youngest child of 4, my daughter, once asked me when she was very little whether I was going to be the eternal general. I love the job, and I don't need to tell you, it is so important now what you are doing. I just want to say thank you. You're the firewall, you're the bulwark, you are the enforcers that will help save our democracy. That is certainly no exaggeration, and there are days when I miss that job. Don't tell Attorney General Tong.
Our secret.
But I want to ask you a question that is spurred by a rally that I literally just attended for parents who have lost loved ones to suicide or other problems related to social media, the toxic content that is driven by certain social media sites. And my question is partly about that phenomenon. We have a measure here, it's called the Kids Online Safety Act. I've championed it with Senator Blackburn. It passed the Senate in the last session by a vote of 91-3, very bipartisan. We hope to pass it again in the Senate and then get it through the House. But my question is about the impact of social media as you see it in empowering the fringe groups that espouse violence, in spawning and spreading hate and friction. I know this is a somewhat vague question, and we're taught as trial lawyers, never ask a question if you don't know what the answer is going to be. But I think it would be very useful to get your perspective on how social media, as much as it can be a benefit to all of us, also can be a source of the divisions, the frictions, and sometimes the violence in our society.
Well, Senator, first of all, thank you for your 2 decades and as an AG, still a legend in our caucus. I won't tell Tong, though. I think I speak for all of us. This is outside of the context of we're talking about suing people who cause harm to our state, including the president. I don't think anybody's causing more harm right now to a generation of kids than social media companies. It's one of the few things that generates genuine bipartisan agreement across AGs 50 states are on the lawsuits we filed against TikTok and Meta. Just recently, I sued Discord, which is devastating a generation of young kids. This is like tobacco in the 70s and 80s. This is the equivalent of Joe Camel to kids. And I do worry that this administration, given their views on how the federal government can use its authority, given the change in what the Supreme Court has said with respect to agency deference, that they're going to have fewer tools, even if they wanted to use them, and I don't think they want to use them. And it dovetails with what we're talking about, because as has been said about political violence, as can be said about what we've seen with respect to organizing real harms in our states, so much of it happens on social media. And yes, notwithstanding Section 230, these sites all have terms of service. They all make promises to the general public about harms they're going to protect people from, and then they don't do it. That's the core of our lawsuits, which, as you know, is a tried and true consumer protection theory. So I think I speak for all of us when I say it is a cause that we all care deeply about, and it's devastating a generation of young kids.
Senator, if I just may add, the work we also do in Massachusetts is complementing this multi-state bipartisan lawsuit against these social media companies. I just recently had to submit testimony in our state legislature for what we call the Study Act, a bill that would ban cell phones in school during the school day, but not just to ban cell phones, but because we have been seeing not just social media apps in the context of mental health issues, but the uptick in bullying and harassment in some egregious cases where young people are using the social media apps in their phones during school. And then we expect teachers or educators to police that. But in the same legislation, we recognize that litigation can take a really long time. So we're also holding social media companies accountable within that state legislation, recognizing we may not get those remedies through our lawsuits as soon as we can. And I think there's an appetite in the State House because folks want to know what can they do in the midst of this Trump accountability work to still move the needle forward on issues that are just as important. And that, of course, includes social media companies and holding them accountable through a state vehicle.
May I say,
General?
Senator, if it wasn't for some of these social media platforms, the epidemic of auto theft among certain brands probably never would have happened. I mean, there's two particular brands that are the target of choice for car thieves, right? You all know what they are, Kia, Hyundai, right? But it took, social media to teach kids how to hotwire one of them with a UBS cord, and numbers all over the country, 800% increase in auto thefts, So I mean, that's just one little slice, and I worry that because our federal government is not the partner it used to be, quite honestly, that's one of the byproducts of all of this, is that I believe we used to be able to go to them and say, hey, let's team up and work on this. They're increasingly not available, and they're the ones with the resources who can really bring results forward. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Senator, if I may, I think you hit it on the nail. As A.G. Platkin pointed out, we have come together, and it's one place where we can come together focusing on social media's harms to youth. But the reality is it doesn't stop at youth. The misinformation on social media has us where we are today. And unless we as a country, I don't know that it's legal response, but unless we can find a way to wrap our arms around this, I don't know what the end of this is.
Yeah, I want to just say finally, I appreciate your courage and conviction in pursuing the litigation, bipartisan litigation. And the comparison to big tobacco is unmistakable. Both doing harm, both having a business model that thrives on addiction, both aware of the harm and denying it. And with big tobacco, the big breakthrough for us was discovery. Good old-fashioned discovery. Documents that showed not only did they know about the harm they were doing, they were destroying the evidence. the research they did themselves that showed the harm that they were doing. And one of the differences is that big tech companies do have a degree of immunity, but you're showing how you can get around it. And Big Tobacco thought it was immune as well. They had never settled a case. They had never lost a case. The Department of Justice of the United States didn't want to take action against Big Tobacco, partly because of the legal obstacles, partly because of the political hurdles. And so I thank you for standing up for the consumers, the children and families of America in what you're doing, which is in the great tradition of state attorneys general. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. Next is the former chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee of Senate Judiciary and now the ranking member, Senator from California, Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Congressmember Raskin, thank you for your leadership and your voice and your friendship as well. And thank you to all the witnesses for making the time to be here and for your courage to speak up and to speak out. Now, over the years, I've seen my Republican colleagues express serious concerns about states' rights, states' authority, right? Just a fundamental construct in our Constitution. They speak about the need to stop the federal government from overreach on a whole host of issues. They've talked about guns. They've talked about education. They've talked about a woman's autonomy and choices over her own body. They've talked about vaccinations, you name it. But as we sit here today, we witness a Trump administration and a Donald Trump that is running roughshod over states that he disagrees with. And it's been curiously quiet on the other side of the aisle right now. I wonder to myself, where's the outrage over Donald Trump's threat to withhold funds from states but just based on any particular item of his agenda that a state disagrees with? Where's the outrage when the Trump administration ignores the law about spending levels that Congress, on a bipartisan basis, authorized and acted upon? Where's the outrage when the president seeks to make it harder for eligible citizens to register and to vote? Where's the outrage when the president sends armed forces into a state, into communities domestically, over the objections of the governor of that state, let alone local mayors and local law enforcement, all in order to stoke tensions that have already been heightened after a series of increasingly aggressive, performative, cruel immigration raids in places like restaurants, agricultural fields, construction sites. Shouldn't have to wait for this to happen in your state, colleagues, before we speak up, because you know very well that it's happening in mine. But this is what we're seeing. And again, silence on the other side. Just to speak to California for a second, the state that I'm proud to represent. California contributes about $83 billion more in funding to the federal treasury than it receives. We are a donor state, more than any other state in the nation, yet the Trump administration threatens to strip funds from my state, along with all the states represented by the people around this table. That's as outrageous as it is un-American. And so I want to hear more about just what that would mean for the country if he follows through with that. Attorney General Campbell. Now, Massachusetts has joined California in arguing that the Trump administration cannot strip federal funding based on a state's immigration-related policies. Now, we know it's the job of the federal government to enforce immigration law, not the job of states or local governments, but Massachusetts, California, others have adopted immigrant-friendly policies at times in the interest of our communities, in the interest of our economy, in the interest of public health and more. Now, late last week, you secured a victory in one of those lawsuits. Can you just explain that particular case? Can you explain the kinds of funds that the Trump administration is trying to withhold and what that withholding of funds would mean for community?
Thank you, Senator. And of course, we would all want to acknowledge A.G. Bonta, who is a part of this coalition. We work closely with him on a regular basis. And I went to UCLA Law School, so I also have to give them a shout out at UCLA. So A.G. Raul mentioned this earlier. So whether it's almost twofold. You have the administration intentionally seeking to cut funding unlawfully, whether in the context of public health, our libraries, cultural institutions, public safety grants, you name it, just unlawfully cut them. Then you have this other category where they are conditioning the monies on something that we are doing or not doing. In this case, it was them wanting us to advance certain type of immigration policy within our states and attempting to bully us, frankly, to implement the cruel and fear-mongering immigration policies that we're seeing from this administration, including in the ways in which ICE is showing up in our communities in our respective states, or to attach other conditions to the grants. DEI, for example, we've been reminding folks that DEIA policies are lawful. And they are attempting to tell folks, no, we're going to take your money away if you're doing those policies or implementing DEIA policies, or we're going to take your transportation funding away or your FEMA funding away if you're not doing our immigration enforcement for us, or some other unlawful policy based on some ideology that they hold as an administration. So in this most recent case, we won. A judge essentially said, you cannot do that. And I think this was a preliminary injunction. We have preliminary injunction TROs, but this was a preliminary injunction where they could not condition funding for FEMA or certain transportation funding on bullying the states to advance certain type of immigration policy, which we've seen in other contexts too, and we've also won there as well.
Great. Let the victories continue. And it shouldn't be a question, but it has become one. I mean, up until this administration and this president, you would never conceive of the notion of a president of an executive branch of the federal government not complying with court orders. But here we are. Just as a follow-up to your responses, a question for Attorney General Plotkin. You said in your testimony that freezing these funds is making your citizens less safe. And I understand there was a very passionate response to a question on this topic from Senator Klobuchar. Can you speak a little bit more of how the administration's actions have made it harder for state and local law enforcement to do its job?
Yes, well, first of all, Senator, thank you for your leadership and for your bravery. I would note just really quickly in response to your last question, there is one former state attorney general in Washington who once led a coalition of 26 states up to the Supreme Court advocating against federal government's ability to coerce states through spending, and her name is Pam Bondi. I think with respect to your question, this going to what I said earlier, Senator, this is an administration that touts law and order. I would candidly put our states and the states in our coalition's public safety records up against any of the states that are not part of our coalition. When you look at gun violence, rates of domestic violence, human trafficking, drug trafficking, our approach to law enforcement is working. 2 years running with record low numbers of shootings in New Jersey. How do we do that? Well, we've had really close partnerships across federal, state, and local governments. We funded things like license plate reader technology, which the Trump administration is cutting. We've put law enforcement on the street. We've empowered them to focus on the crimes that we want to prevent. This administration has done the opposite. They've cut funding for law enforcement. They've attacked law enforcement officers. They've made coordination across state, county, and local and federal government law enforcement weaker than it's been at any point, I think, since 9/11. And the result of that is the people in our states are less safe. If we're not coordinating and sharing information effectively, people get hurt. And we've seen it in real cases. And I would implore the federal government to do, frankly, even what it did in the first Trump administration, which is separate politics from law enforcement, and in many respects. And that is not happening right now. And I think the upshot here is you're going to see crime potentially go up, and the blame should be on the parties that are not actively trying to work with law enforcement to keep our community safe.
Thank you. And just a
Thank you, sir.
couple comments in closing. I know my time is up, but I think 2 points that I believe are important for this record. Number one, to your last point, that's been the situation, the concern, frankly, in Los Angeles these last couple of weeks, between the increasingly, cruel and extreme ICE raids and detention, immigration enforcement actions, et cetera. But the way the administration has gone about it raises the tensions in Los Angeles, or the objections of local leadership and local law enforcement, the federalization of National Guard troops and deployment into our communities. And as the protests, which have been by and large peaceful, but we know folks who exploit protests on sensitive issues, different crowd of folks that caused the vandalism and the looting, et cetera. Even as that was dissipating, this administration further escalates by sending in the Marines. What I hear from local law enforcement is that it makes the job of local law enforcement harder because there's no communication, no coordination. So not only is it unnecessary, it's frankly counterproductive and putting general public and law enforcement officials in danger. Number one. Number two, a moment just to clarify for the record what sanctuary policy is and what sanctuary policy isn't. And I apologize if this was covered in the hearing already, but I think there's a big either misunderstanding, intentionally or unintentionally, of what sanctuary policy represents, because that's what the administration is holding against the state of California and so many others. All sanctuary means is a state or a local jurisdiction would not commit their state or local resources for the enforcement of federal immigration laws. It is the job of the federal government to enforce federal laws, not state and locals to do that work. Does it mean that the federal government can't come into a state or into a state? Of course not. But the job of local law enforcement is public safety. And it is, based on my experience, and if any of you disagree, hurtful to public safety if somebody, depending on their immigration status, legal or documented or otherwise, chooses not to come forward and report a crime because of that concern. Or if they've been witnesses or have information to a crime, they will not come forward with that information because of their fear. I see heads nodding in the affirmative, so I don't see any disagreement. But I think it's important for the purposes of this hearing, for the purposes of the deliberations of this Congress, to lay that out. And I will end with this, because it just happens to be Los Angeles right now, just happens to be California right now, just happens to be a conversation about immigrant rights and due process right now. But this administration, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, has not been shy about what they perceive as their, quote, mission: to liberate Los Angeles from the governor and from the mayor. It is a dangerous notion when an administration believes it is their job or that of the military to determine which duly elected governors and mayors can lead their constituents. That's part of what we're speaking up against, but a reflection of the tone that this administration chooses to create. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your service,
Senator Padilla.
your leadership, and for being here today.
Congressman Raskin had to leave for another meeting, and I do too. But I want to thank the panel and leaving you in the best hands of all, Senator Van Hollen of the state of Maryland, and he's going to wrap up the hearing after asking a few questions. So take it away, Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Dick. Well, let me start by thanking Senator Durbin and Congressman Raskin for bringing us together, and then thank all of you. And I know you've covered a lot of territory because I've got a good team that's been keeping me informed. So I do want to say at the outset a big thank you, not just for being here today, but for being on the front lines of trying to protect your states and our country from an absolutely lawless president. I've never seen anything at this scale and scope and magnitude. I think we're up to over 300 cases filed in federal courts to try to protect individuals and states and the country. And as was mentioned, just a whole mountain of TROs and preliminary injunctions. That's a testament to your good work, and I want to just thank you. We were discussing a little bit the diversion of attention and resources away from fighting violent criminals toward, in many cases under this administration, going after immigrants who have not committed any kind of violent offenses, right? President Trump tries to mislead the country as if this is all about going after violent members of the immigration community. But we know that many of the people who are being disappeared from our communities have absolutely no history of violence whatsoever. In fact, they've been contributing to their local communities. And you can't have it both ways. You can't say you're going to have a mandatory 3,000 people have to be picked up every day and still claim that you're prioritizing just violent individuals. There's just, that doesn't compute. So I wanted to thank you, and it's great to see my friend Keith Ellison here. Thank you for being back. But this apparently has become a serious issue of diversion of resources. I'm just, reading here from an NBC report that says at least one U.S. Attorney's Office stopped a federal prosecution of a dangerous criminal because the case was not immigration related. Another report saying immigration status is now question number one in terms of charging decisions. An assistant U.S. attorney said, is this person a documented immigrant? Is this person an undocumented immigrant? In other words, not does this person pose a threat to the community, but simply what is their immigration status? So, Attorney General Ellison, can you just speak to how this actually endangers our community, and have you begun to witness this pattern yourself?
Absolutely. I tell you, just last night, I was telling my wife that I was going to be getting on the plane in the morning to come here, and I got a call from a friend who says, what should I do? There's somebody in Minneapolis who is telling immigrants who are not citizens or permanent residents that they can easily get them all the documents they want as long as they pay the low price of, $10,000, whatever. So this is clearly a lie. It's a scam. And there's a lot of things to cover, but just from the standpoint of financial exploitation, once the president says that immigrants are sort of not a part of the human family anymore, not going to receive rights anymore, not going to be given respect anymore. And what it does is it opens up the worst elements in our society to prey on these people, because who are they going to tell? Yeah. Who are they going to complain to? They are absolutely vulnerable. And sometimes I think this is the point, Senator, because we see all of this attack on immigrant communities. And then last week, I'm still mystified that Trump says, oh, well, I've been hearing from some of my donor friends in the ag world and in the hospitality world, and maybe we need to look at how we're doing things. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I thought, whoa, what are we doing here? I think what's really happening, and I'm just speaking on what I suspect, is that they want undocumented people here. They just don't want them to have any rights, and they want them to be afraid, and they want them to work for less. And so what Trump seemed to be saying is that as long as you're a friend of mine, and as long as your workers who are making you rich are leaving or hurting your bottom line, then maybe I'll ease up on you. So what kind of policy is that? That's a policy without fairness, without justice, without proportionality. And so it heightens the need for us to, when we get the gavels back, a fair, meaningful immigration policy.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Attorney General. The application has been incredibly discriminatory, driven by one of the things that always drives Donald Trump is, what are his donors asking him to do? So just another question for each of you. Attorney General Bondi is going to be testifying on Capitol Hill this week for the first time since her confirmation. She'll be on the House side, I believe, tomorrow, and on Wednesday, she'll be testifying before the subcommittee where I'm the ranking member, which is the Appropriations Subcommittee on Commerce, State, and Commerce, Judiciary, State, and Science. So here's my question to each of you. If you had one question that you could ask to Attorney General Bondi, or one point that you want to make to her at this point in time, what would it be? And maybe we'll start with you, Attorney General Raul.
I might cheat a little bit, but a reminder of the 10th Amendment, first of all, and whether she still believes it. But I think I mentioned in my opening remarks that from the moment I took office as Attorney General, I've had a tremendous collaboration with federal law enforcement partners, from the FBI to DEA to ATF, Homeland Security, Secret Service, working on criminal matters. With the prioritization of civil immigration enforcement, that is under threat. And it's been a tremendous collaboration that has allowed us to reduce gun violence and allowed us to crack down on organized retail crime and other human trafficking and gun trafficking and so forth. And I would ask, is that still a prioritization, or does everything surrender to civil immigration enforcement that the data does not reveal thus far is prioritizing criminals?
Public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It's a great question. I think I would echo AG Raul in lifting up actual examples where this administration has actually violated the law, not to advance public safety. So in the immigration context, there are real cases in Massachusetts where folks were denied due process, where there were unlawful detentions. And after providing those examples, I might ask her, what does the rule of law actually mean to her? I can't stress, we've all been going to our respective communities, town hall meetings, you name it, really trying to explain to folks what we actually mean by the rule of law. What does having a constitution in this contract between your government and you actually mean in tangible ways and terms that people can wrap their head around? I would love to get from her vantage point, after someone lists the very cases and specific cases where they have seen, and we have seen, unlawful actions by this administration, what does it actually mean to her? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to know how the U.S. Department of Justice pulling out of the enforcement of consent decrees that cities and the federal government had arrived at based on years of investigation, is that going to improve relationships between police and communities? I mean, I represent the city where George Floyd was killed. We took 2 years of investigation to come to an investigation and then came to an agreement between the city and the federal government, which she has now abandoned. How do we instill trust between community and police when community can't even trust that the federal government's going to stay at the table?
Attorney General Bondi is the named defendant in a lawsuit we filed last week about 12,000 forced reset triggers that the Department of Justice is playing the role of arms dealer into our communities. I would ask her very simply, because they have not explained to the American public how putting 12,000 arms or machine guns onto the street more powerful than M16s makes us in any way more safer, and whose interest does it serve other than the gun lobby who they're settling with.
Thank you, and I saw that case that you filed, and I think that's a great question, as all of your questions. I appreciate this. Just in closing, Attorney General Platkin, we obviously had the situation in New Jersey where a member of Congress was indicted. Senator Padilla, experienced what he did, where you had federal agents involved. This is to you because of New Jersey, but if anyone has any ideas, what is the role, right, of state attorney generals and state and local law enforcement when you have people at the direction of a lawless administration taking actions that has direct impacts on people like Congresswoman MacIver.
And I'm very familiar with, obviously, the charges against Congresswoman MacIver, as well as the charges against Mayor Baraka that were dismissed 12 days after filing, quote, in the interest of moving forward, which is not a standard that I've ever dismissed a case under. This should alarm us. If you politicize law enforcement, there's not much left. And it doesn't just undermine faith in the actions of those particular officers involved. It undermines actions in my state of 42,000 officers that are doing hard work every day and makes their job harder. And regardless of the facts of any specific case, if you're going to charge a public official, as I've done, with a crime, there better damn well be good evidence of criminal conduct and clear evidence of intent. You don't hold them to any higher standard, but you also don't hold them to any lower standard. And the politicization of the Justice Department, the functioning of the Justice Department, conducting criminal investigations by tweet or on cable news networks in advance of even a grand jury hearing evidence, those are kangaroo courts meant to embarrass people and target political opponents. They are not what the criminal justice system is supposed to do.
Thank you. Any other comments on that?
You know, Senator, one thing's for sure. The reason that people obey the law is because they feel that it is legitimate. They obey the law because they believe, well, some people went into a room, they all voted and said, this is going to be the law, it's legitimate, and the people who enforce it are therefore legitimate. Once you say it's not legitimate, it's all a matter of whether you're friends with the president or not. What you will foster disobedience to law because you've undermined the inherent credibility that associates with democratic law. And so this